Morning, good afternoon, or good evening, and welcome to the sixth CCB's Qctr. Um, I hope that Kevin is following me. Yep. Thank you, Kevin. Welcome to the CCB's Qctr, the sixth already. And some people told me, like, you always talk about the CCB, but you never explain to your audience what the CCB exactly is. So maybe this is the right moment. The CCB is the Center for Cybersecurity Belgium, and we are appointed as the national CSIRT by law. We do work under the authorization of the Prime Minister of Belgium, and we have a very important mission. That's to make Belgium one of the least cyber vulnerable countries in Europe. And to be honest, we are not doing a bad job at the moment. Okay, Kevin, thank you. At the moment, we have 1,340 registrants. Last time I looked a minute ago, it was already 1,355 from 66 different countries. As you see, that's something that covers quite some time zones in the world. Thank you for being here. If we have so many people in the room, then it would be won't be it is a good idea to let you know that CCB is hiring at the moment. CCB is going to expand very fast in 2022, and we have a lot of vacancies. If you are interested to join our fantastic team, then I invite you to visit our webpage that is mentioned on the screen, where you can find all the vacancies that we have at the moment. The vacancies are open to people with the European nationality. Next slide, please. Okay, a Qctr without an agenda is not a Qctr. Today on the agenda, we will start with a presentation from our Managing Director, Miguel de Breukere, followed by Seong-Soo Park, a South Korean researcher, a senior security researcher at the Kaspersky Great team, and he will tell us a little bit about the Blue Norov gang. That presentation will be followed by something that is quite important those days, the vulnerability management. Kevin Holvoet, as usual, is hosting the expert panel with 4 experts that will tell us a little bit about how they look at vulnerability management and how we should manage vulnerabilities. And then the next on the agenda is a research topic brought by Marcus Nees and Kosten Raju. First time, it's a world first. This research has never been presented yet. So Kosten and Marcus are bringing this afternoon the results of their research about Log4j. And that presentation will be followed by a presentation of Milo from the Slovakia CERT. He will tell us everything about Taranos. Okay, that's the agenda for this afternoon. Maybe a few words how to use the Livestorm platform. Please, for the guest speakers, do not forget to turn off your notification sound. You see it on the screen. How you can turn it off, just go to the right bottom corner on your screen where you find the button apps. Click on it, you will see a small window, and there you will see a bell that you can use to turn off the notification sound. Very important, because that sound is very annoying. Then we have 3 rooms that you can use. We have a chat room. That's the room where you can chat with other people, where you can have some fun. It's not forbidden to tell some jokes over there, but please behave yourself and do not ask questions in the chat room, because the stream of messages is sometimes too fast for us to follow. So if you ask questions in the chat room, then there is a risk that we will not see the question and that we will not be able to answer it. But we have a solution for that. We have a questions room. If you have any questions for speakers, please ask your question in the questions room. And important for us and for the guest speakers is the polls room. That's the room where we ask you questions. So please help us with providing feedback using those polls and do participate in it. Okay. Then, maybe last but not least, who am I? My name is Pedro de Rekere. I'm the head of CCB Citrus, that's the Cyber Threat Research and Intelligence Sharing Department of the CCB, and I will be your host for this afternoon. And for those who are using social media, if you tweet about it or if you use another social media channel, please use the hashtag CCBQCTR. And then we can go to the first presentation for this afternoon. First presentation comes from the managing director of the CCB and also the founder of the CCB, Miguel de Bruiker. Miguel, may I ask you to join me on stage, please?
Good afternoon, Pedro. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for being here. It's an honor again to be able to talk just 5 to 10 minutes about something that we have been doing the last few months. So let me share my screen for a small presentation, maybe. Here we go. It should be this one. Here you go. So thank you very much again for listening to us. As Pedro said, our mission is to make Belgium one of the least cyber vulnerable countries in Europe. And how do you handle vulnerability? So that is a question that we asked ourselves a few years ago. How are we going to achieve this mission? If we look at the cybercrime phenomena, we all know this: ransomware, phishing attacks, data exfiltration, mobile malware, the flu bots, DDoS attacks, supply chain, intellectual property is stolen, governments are attacked. How is this possible that this is going on? Why are we so vulnerable? And we think that there are two elements that we should work on. First of all, there is the human vulnerability. We all know that we are ignorant, we are greedy. There is some speculation. We like that. And on the other hand, there is a complexity of the technical environments. Let's be honest. If you have to manage our days, a large environment, a hybrid environment with your own systems linked to cloud environments, and people are working from everywhere in the world, I mean, it's a hell of a job, to be honest. So that's why we have tried to understand how criminals attack those systems. And they come from two sides. They attack the human side and the technical side. For the technical side, we are collecting all the information that we think that criminals can find also in a quite easy way about vulnerabilities, vulnerable systems in our network. And we put all that information into a large database, and the goal is to warn the owners of the system. So we are monitoring all the time new vulnerabilities, existing vulnerabilities. We are identifying those vulnerable systems and storing them into a central Arctic Hub database. We are trying to identify as fast as possible the owners of those vulnerable systems in order to send them a direct warning. So we have translated spear phishing into spear warning. That was a little bit the idea. And we try to do that as much as possible in an automated way. On the other side, you have the human vulnerability. So we launched, and I told that in one of the previous presentation, we created at the end of 2017 a mail address that is suspicious at saveonweb.be, saveonweb.be being our portal for the population. We created that mail address in 4 languages: Dutch, French, German, and English. And we called it to the population: forward us your messages. And last year, 2021, we got more than 4.5 million messages from the population. So we receive on average more than 12,000 messages a day from the population. And this gives us quite an interesting view on what is going on, what phishing attacks are coming up. And as I already explained, what we're doing is that we are sending that to Google, to Microsoft through a third party. We also now have operational our Belgian anti-phishing shield. So we filter out those malicious domains that are 100% malicious with a, let's say, certainty of 99.99 and some nines%. So we didn't have, or we don't have false positives. We didn't have false positives during the testing period of 1 year. And we shared those malicious domains immediately with the internet service providers. For the moment, we have 3 main internet service providers that are onboarded on that system. And in for the last, for instance, 90 days, we have, or they have redirected 2.5 million clicks to a landing page of our center, warning the user that this is probably not a good idea to go there. And now we have our new tool is we are using that information of those 12,000 emails that we get a day to send to a smartphone app. So we have launched a few months ago, not even a few months ago, our new app. And we have a system that is monitoring constantly all the phishing emails that come in. When a threshold is hit for a specific type of phishing messages, an alert is sent to search.be. They will evaluate and they will immediately push a warning to the smartphone app. Meaning that in the news part, you have generic news and you have awareness messages, but you also have those watch out. We currently receive a lot of messages with the subject, this or that. So people are immediately warned about those new phishing campaigns. So the smartphone app is not only receiving all the information from those phishing emails, you can, under threats, you can also link it to your home or your SME Wi-Fi. Then it will register your public-facing IP address, and if there is a match between that IP address and an entry into our Arctic Hub Central database, you will also get that message about, for instance, that flu-bot infection. You will get it on your smartphone. For that, of course, there are a lot of measures and precautions that have to be taken. The IP address has to be sufficiently stable, that has to be monitored, that it doesn't change too much so that we don't send the wrong information to the wrong smartphone. So this is our new tool that we are implementing. It has been launched half of November and currently over 175,000 users in Belgium have installed the app. The app can only be installed, Save on Web app, in Belgium, since it's only linked to Belgian vulnerabilities. It's only linked to Belgian scene phishing campaigns. And then, as Pedro said, we are currently using a little bit also, or making publicity that we are looking for a lot of people. We are looking for certification experts, program and project service managers. For our CERT, we need analysts, and for our CTI team, we need cyber threat analysts. So thank you very much for being here. Now we go to the real part, the more technical part. It's an honor for being able to host this event for you all. I hope you enjoy our Qctr briefings. And if you have any questions or remarks, thank you very much for sending them over. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Miguel. As usual, an interesting talk from your side, and interesting also for the audience to see what new toy that we have launched very recently with quite some success. Thank you. Next on the agenda is a world first. It's a presentation about the Blue Neurov Group. The research, the report was published this morning by Kaspersky, and CCB has already the research behind the paper here live in our event. We have with us Seong-Soo Park from South Korea. So Seong-Soo, if you can join me on stage, please. I hope that is Here?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, cool.
Yes, Youngsu. Good evening
Great.
for you, because I think it's already evening for you.
Yes, it's evening, but it's a good time to speaking. No problem.
What time is it now in South Korea?
It's a 9:45 p.m.
Okay. It's like you said, it's a very good time to give a presentation.
Yeah.
Youngsu, what are you exactly bringing for us? If you can say it in a few words, what may we expect from your presentation?
It's our Bloomberg Group's research. They recently they target the cryptocurrency industry, so we share the whole technical details and their recent changes about this campaign. So I will talk about that.
Oh, I'm very curious to hear more about it. The floor is yours, Youngsu.
Okay, let me share my screen first. Okay. Okay, hello everyone. Thank you for attending my presentation. In this talk, I'm going to talk about the Blue North Group's campaign we call the Snatch Crypto, and I will share their latest activity and sophisticated TTP of this campaign. And actually, the blog posting about this presentation already out today. So after presentation, you can find more details from our secure listed blog. Then let's start. And allow me introduce myself very briefly. My name is Song Park from South Korea, and I've been working in information security industry almost a decade. And now I'm working in Kaspersky Global Research and Analysis team as a senior security researcher. And actually, I'm the only one who can speak Korean in our team. So I usually tracking the Korean speaking threat actors such as the Lazarus, Kimski, and Skycraft, Dark Hotel, and Blue North Group. And before we moving on, let's see briefly about the Blue North Group. And this group is a Korean-speaking APT actor, and they are well known in public as the group who was behind the Bangladesh bank heist, successfully stolen the $1 million. And we also have been investigated about this group and published what we discovered in 2017. And unlike other APT groups, the Blue North only target the financial entity such as a bank, cryptocurrency business, and the fintech. And recently, they expand their target, DeFi industry, and the decentralized financial industry. And Blue North has a abundant skill set and tools to compromise their target, and especially they use the tailored malware target for the Swift system before, and they are very well resourced threat actor and only target for their illegal financial profits. And generally, after big announcement from the security vendors, APT actor shows the different response of them. And one group vanished after exposing their activities, and the other group don't care about the publishment from security industry. And last response is change their TTPs. And in Blue North case, they choose the third case after big announcement from security vendors, including us. They change their tools slightly, and also they start to shift their target from bank to cryptocurrency industry. And as you know, bank can invest large money for their defense system, and also they have a lot of resource to detect and respond against the cyber threat. But the startup in cryptocurrency industry still not have enough resources, and as well as it's a very attractive factor that the value of cryptocurrency is a surge, and it also provide some anonymity and relatively easy to launder the money. So many threat actor target the cryptocurrency business, including the Blue North Group. Then let's see their latest strategy. And first, let me introduce the latest infection vector. The Blue North Group used the social engineering tricks very often. Before contacting to the victim, they conduct a lot of research about the cryptocurrency industry. And for this research, the Blue North usually use the LinkedIn service. And many people use the LinkedIn for business connection and marketing, So the threat actor can easily find the people in the cryptocurrency industry and associated communities. And after acquiring the sufficient information about the victim, they contact to the victim through the social media or email, and sometimes they do many conversation with the victim to get some trust from them. And when Blue Note contact to the victim, they also made a fake account and abuse the reputation of a specific company in cryptocurrency industry. And the company logos are displayed in here were abused by Blue Note Group for impersonation in social engineering tricks. And you can see the company Coins Code. It's a US-based managed cryptocurrency service provider, and Emergo, I don't know, but it's a blockchain technology company, and CoinBig is a cryptocurrency exchange. And not only company in cryptocurrency industry, they also abused many investment company to approach the victim. And you can see the Diawa Corporate Investment is a Japan-based investment company, and Decrypt Capital is investment firm only focus on the blockchain industry, and UB Capital, Global Brain, Innovation Ventures, and Ant Capital, also the venture capital investment company. And if you are working in the startup cryptocurrency company and some venture capital contact to you for investment, I think a lot of victims easily trust them and reply from their contact. And when they sent a spear phishing email, they created a fake account disguised as an employee from these companies. And in several cases, we've seen that Blue Note Group created some fake website of this company to get a trust from the victim. And but please note that this is no proof that the company listing here was compromised, and Blue Note Group just abused this company's reputations. And during the forensic investigation from my colleague, we saw likely compromise of existing registered company and the use of its resource such as a social media account and messenger and email to initiate the business interaction with the target. You can see the screenshot that the actor contact to the victim through LinkedIn and send a malicious document after the usual conversations. And this is an email came from the real case we investigated. And in this case, the Blue Note Group sent a spear phishing email disguised as a Google document sharing. And you can see the Xbox. And we opened this email in the network disconnected machine. So there's an Xbox in it. But if the victim open this email from their host, it will connect to the attacker's infrastructure, and attacker can notice the victim open this email. And in another cases, they used a different email scheme. In this email looks like a forwarding email from the trust entity, but actually this email was fabricated by the actors. And the interesting thing is there is a via sendgrid.net message from email body. And SendGrid seems a service for email distribution and email marketing. We are not sure the Blue Note has an account for this service or how to abuse the SendGrid service. SendGrid seems to be legitimate and a reputable business, which is probably why the Gmail accepts the MIME header customization in this email. And eventually, the spear phishing document contains the old remote template exploit we call the CVE 2017-0199. And the malicious document tried to fetch template from the remote server when user open it. And it also showed the lure document to make the victim is a V9 document. And I will describe the details of this infection chain later. Okay, then let's see the infection procedure of this campaign. Not only the malicious document I mentioned the previous slide, and another technique Blue Note Group used in Snatch Crypto campaign is archive Windows Shocker file. Other security vendor or researcher called this infection procedure as dangerous password. And in this case, Blue North sent an archive file related to the project development or cryptocurrency related one. And generally, this archive file contains a password protected document and the Windows Shocker file. If the user executes the Shocker file, it fetch Visual Basic script from the remote server, and this VBS file just download the next stage Visual Basic script. And the second stage VBS file collect the basic system information and send it to the remote server. After that, if the victim is valuable, then malware operator send the next stage PowerShell script. And this simple PowerShell script is capable of downloading the next stage payload. And the fetch PowerShell script is also has a capability of collecting the system information. Using this second stage PowerShell script, BlueNorth deliver the PowerShell agent, which has the functionality of control the victim. And even though this PowerShell agent has a sufficient capability, the malware operator implant additional Windows executable format backdoor if necessary. So it's very complicated. It seems this Windows executable type backdoor has maybe sufficient function to control the victim, and they might familiar with this malware. And after monitoring for some time, BlueNorth finally delivered for collecting credentials such as a keylogger and the malware for screenshot capturing. And this is a full infection procedure of this case, and we can see that how is a complicated malware distribution process and deliver the final payload very carefully. And we discovered only a few victims has a full infection chain or the final payload. And in addition, in several victims, they only used some parts of these procedures. When I investigated this research, I spent a lot of time and effort to figure out to full infection procedure, and you can see the IOCs and more details is from our blog. And other infection method is weaponized Word document I mentioned before. And this infection starts from the malicious Word document contains the remote template. And when the victim opens the document in the vulnerable system, it contacts the attacker server and fetch the document template file and load it. And this document template contains the Visual Basic macro. And this macro is very extensive. It has more than 800 lines, and this macro use quite interesting technique to load the next stage payload. At first, this macro finds the first stage malicious document and read the custom XML field in it. And the item1.xml file contains two variables, which has the huge size of a base 64 encoded data. And when decoded this payload, it contains the JPG image file header, but it contains a P file following the JPG file header. So the Visual Basic macro parse this payload and inject it to the legitimate process. And the injected payload is a backdoor, and it starts to backdoor operations. And as you can see, until now, there is no persistent mechanism. So the malware operator deliver the additional malware and register it at the Windows registry. And using this backdoor, the BlueNorth starts to collect the credential from the infected host. And BlueNorth utilize the various infection methods in Snatch Crypto campaign, and the infection at upside of this slide is a method I mentioned before. But sometimes BlueNorth sent just a malicious document with a macro. And this Visual Basic script created a PowerShell agent, and this PowerShell script is just capable of controlling the infected host. And using this PowerShell, the actor delivered the Windows executable type backdoor, and eventually this malware operator implant additional backdoor collecting some credentials. And this is a whole infection procedure we identified until now. And as you can see, the BlueNorth group use various infection methods, and they assemble some infection method in various ways. Then let me share why it's not easy to understand the full infection. And you can see the number of samples relate to the infection case with only the Shocker files. And we found more than 60 malicious Shocker files used in the first stage, but we can only find less than 5 samples from the second and third stage. And relatively many backdoor samples was discovered, almost 40. And we found only 2 stellar malwares. And also, I check how many samples on the virus total. Sample on the virus total means someone discovered those samples and uploaded to check the detection from the multiple antivirus engine. And almost 80% of samples from the first stage already on the virus total, but not many next stage sample on the virus total. And you can see the final payload were not on the virus total. It means those samples are not much exposed in security industry, and we have very low visibility about it. And also, if you find the shortcut file and the backdoor file from the virus total, it's not easy to find the connection of them, and it's not easy to understand the full infection chain of this campaign. And then let me introduce how this group steal the cryptocurrency from the victim. And like other APT attack, the Blue North group conduct some general style APT attack. And first, they start to collect system basic information through the Windows commands such as ipconfig, who am I, and net user. And after this recon of the infected host, they start to collect some useful files and informations. And from one Chinese-speaking user, Blue North copy some suspicious Polish file and the crypto-related configuration file. And through this procedure, they might want to understand the victim's internal policy and some structures. And after collecting the information, Blue North can understand well about their targets. And my colleague investigated the compromised victim by this group and figure out how they are stolen the cryptocurrency. And after monitoring the victim for some time, the Blue North realized that the victim used the MetaMask Chrome extension to manage their cryptocurrency. MetaMask is a very renowned cryptocurrency wallet through a browser extension or mobile application. And after understanding the victim used the MetaMask, Blue North modified the source of the MetaMask Chrome extension. The yellow part is injected code compared to the original code. And they changed the extension source from the web store to the local store, and they replaced the core extension component, background.js, background JavaScript file. And they compromised the main component JavaScript file of MetaMask and add the relevant script to steal the cryptocurrency. And from the forensic investigation of compromise hosted by my colleague, actually my manager, he's a Vitaly Kamluk, and we found 2 different methods the actor stolen the cryptocurrency. From one victim, we identified the injected script to monitor the user's cryptocurrency transaction and forward the transaction history to the command and control servers. And in other case, they realized the user owned a large amount of cryptocurrency, but he or she used a hardware wallet. To steal the money, the Blue North analyzed the 6 megabytes of JavaScript code of MetaMask and find the relevant code to inject their code. Can you imagine the 6 megabytes of JavaScript code? It shows how this group put their effort to steal the money. And in second case, when the victim transfer the fund to another account, the transaction is signed with a hardware wallet because the user is a hardware wallet user. But given that the action was initiated by the user at the very right moment, and the doesn't suspect anything fishy is going on and confirm the transaction on the secure device without paying attention to the transaction. And finally, the attacker modify only the not only the recipient address but also put the amount of currency to the limit to drain the whole cryptocurrency. It's very hard to recognize this malicious transaction, but we provide some tips to find the compromised host on our blog. So please go our blog and find the tips. Next is a victimology of this campaign. The target of this campaign is not limited to specific continentals or countries, and this campaign is aimed at various companies deal with cryptocurrency and the smart contract, DeFi, blockchain, and fintech industry. And this victim map was created only using our telemetry, and it contains the Russia, Poland, Slovenia, Ukraine, and Czech Republic, China, India, US, Hong Kong, Singapore, and UAE and Vietnam. However, based on the shortened URL, click history, and the decoy document, we assess there are more victims at globe. And also, we found the upload of weaponized document and compromised MetaMask extension to the virus total from additional countries. And so they are not limited to specific country. Target for any companies, they can make us some financial profits. And Blue North Group has a connection with the Lazarus Group. They are big Korean-speaking state-sponsored actors, and Blue North Group began to grab attention in security industry from 2016 or 2017 after Bangladesh bank heist. And from this, we keep tracking this financial motivated group, and based on the component used in Snatch Crypto campaign, we observe several overlaps with the previous Blue North Group's tools. And it's not easy to conclude only with the first stage payload, but when we look into the next stage payload, we can figure out the connection with the Blue North Group's tools. They keep using the homemade PowerShell agents and can control the infected victim. And Blue North slightly changed this PowerShell script and keep using it in this campaign. And you can see that they just changed several variable or function name in this PowerShell, and old script has a function name get basic information, but new one has a get BI function name. BI stands for maybe the basic information. It's the same functions. And the other overlay we found from the backdoor malware when we check the backdoor components with our Kaspersky threat attribution engine, and we can easily discover that there's a many code overlap with all the Blue North Group tools. Also, this backdoor take advantage of custom IP resolution tricks, and after resolving the embedded domain, it XOR the received IP address with the hard-coded dword value and acquire the real command and control IP address. And this trick has been used by the Blue North Group tools for a long time and also used in this campaign as well. And this is conclusion. We start to track the Snatch Crypto campaign by Blue North Group since 2018, and it's already 4 years. And I assume that during this period, during these 4 years, the Blue North already experienced the benefit of stealing cryptocurrency. And because of expanding of cryptocurrency and blockchain industry and anonymity of cryptocurrency, this group will never slow down their attack for this industry. And as we can see in the case, they are very good at abusing the trust. Blue North Group, they are well understand the target industry, and they do their best to infiltrate the community to get a trust from their victim. So please be aware of this and always be suspicious the contact from the someone. And also Blue North keep evolving their tool and techniques with strong motivations and to respond to this elaborated attacks, we should understand well based on the full context. And full context means we have more chance to detect and respond against this attack through many phases. Therefore, it's very important to understand whole procedure and be ready for each attack phase. Yeah, that's it. And I think it's not enough content for someone to understand about this campaign. It's not easy to deliver the whole content in 30 minutes. So please go to our blog and find more details. And also, if you need more or have questions, please contact me or to our company. Or thank you for your attentions.
Okay, thank you very much, Seung-Soo, for this detailed presentation about the
Thank
Blue
you.
Norov group. I looked at my cryptocurrency wallet this morning and it was already bad. So after this presentation, I don't think that the situation with cryptocurrencies will be even better. So thank you for that. I don't see any questions in the questions room, but I saw in the chat room that a few people were asking if it would be possible to get a copy of your presentation. I don't know, Seung-Soo, is that possible to share the presentation with the audience, or what is the policy?
I think so because all contents already published on our blog, so I think I can share the slide.
Okay,
That's not.
well, that's great. What we will do once we have the presentation that you can send to me or to Kevin, Seung-Soo, we will announce it on Twitter, where we're going to publish it on our website, where
Sure.
people can download it. Or if Kaspersky wants to put it somewhere on their websites, we can tweet the link to the people who are
Sure,
joining here the event. Okay, Seung-Soo, have a great evening. Thank you very much for your presentation. And if you're in Brussels one day, please let me know. It will be a pleasure to meet you in person. Thank you, Alfred.
So, Seung-Soo, can you stay for one bit? There is actually one question for you. It was a little bit hidden in the questions, and it was just entered. The question is Blue Norov's weaponized document approach different from other weaponized document attack vectors that have been used in the past by other malicious actors?
Sorry, I don't think so. They just use the known techniques and just a remote template injection technique and just a Visual Basic script embedded the document, but it's not new one. It's not zero day or a sophisticated one, but they just very well to abuse the trust and make some trust with the victim and send to the spear phishing email very right moment. So I think it's not the different one.
Okay, thanks a lot.
Okay, thank you, Kevin, for your intervention, because I missed that question. I see it here right now, but yeah, okay, I missed it. So sorry for that. Thanks, Kevin, for helping me out here. We are a little bit ahead of schedule, but that's not a problem. We are 10 minutes ahead. We are now up to the first break. You can say, oh, already a break after 45 minutes. Yes, because the next presentation about vulnerability management is the expert panel, and that talk will take more than 1 hour. So if we should continue right now, it would be a little bit heavy for the audience to follow. So I suggest that we have our break right now. We are 10 minutes ahead of the agenda. Like I said, that's not a problem. Just keep in mind that we will not restart at 2:35, but we will restart 10 minutes earlier, and that will be at 2:25. So enjoy a little 10 minutes break, and we see each other back in 10 minutes. Thank you. Okay, 25 minutes past 2 here in Belgium, and we are ready for the second part of this Qctr event. Next on the agenda is the expert panel. For the people who have joined our previous events, you know what that means. We bring together a few experts about a certain topic, and everything is going to be hosted again by Kevin Holwood. Kevin, can you join us on stage, please?
Hello, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Kevin. Welcome back. Kevin, are you ready for 1 hour and 50 minutes expert talk?
Of course I am. I'm always ready.
What are you bringing this time for us?
Well, I'm actually bringing 4 very interesting experts, one from Belgium, one from France, and then we have somebody from Germany and also somebody from the other side of the ocean in New York, United States. So 4 very interesting experts who will talk about vulnerability management. I mean, vulnerabilities, they sound easy, but it's not always an easy thing to think about. Especially in our big environments, we can have some, there can be some difficulties in managing your vulnerabilities and making sure that everything is patched, or at least the most important things. So that's what we will talk about.
Don't forget to mention, if you have time left during the talk, maybe you can say a few words about our Belgium spear warning system and how we tackle the vulnerabilities in Belgium to accomplish our mission to make Belgium one of the least vulnerable cyberspaces in Belgium. Kevin, the clock is ticking, so I'm not going to spoil any of your time. The floor is yours. See you in 1 hour and 50 minutes.
Thanks a lot, Pedro. Okay, so welcome. The slide still says 2:35, but we've managed to cut some minutes there, so there's more time for the panel. How awesome is that, right? So this is the panel for the Qctr of the Q4 for 2021. I know we are 2022, but we're talking about the last quarter of 2021. And in here, we will actually talk mostly about vulnerability management. I am Kevin Holwood. I'm the new lead for the Threat Research Center. Sorry, it's all new, for the Threat Research Center that falls under the Citrus department as part of the Center for Cybersecurity Belgium. You can find me on Twitter at DJHash. You can also find me on LinkedIn or send me an email if you need me personally. But if you need to say something to CCB, CERT, or have an incident or something, all our details are on the website on cert.be and ccb.belgium.be. Don't forget to be social and use the hashtag #CCBQCTR if you're tweeting about anything in this panel. Next to being the Threat Research Center lead at CCB Citrus, I am also a SANS teacher for the Forensics 578 Cyber Threat Intelligence course. So that's me, and I will be your moderator this afternoon for the expert panel. Now, just a small reminder, and we will mention this a couple of times, CCB is hiring. Especially, come to me, come join me, right? I'm kidding there. We have a lot of vacancies open, so please look at all the vacancies in here in the link here in the red little box, and try to get everything there. All right. Now, our panel experts. I would like to invite you all. So we have Koen Bossard, who is the solution lead at DaVinci Labs. We have Christopher Franz, an AVP of IT security at Mount Sinai Innovation Partners. We have Julian Vögele from Recorded Future. He is a cyber threat intelligence consultant. And last but not least, we also have Bernard Montel from Paris. He is the EMEA Technical Director and Security Strategist of Tenable Security. Welcome, everyone. I see that we're missing Chris. I'll see if he's in the system already. Yes, he's there. So let me invite him on stage for a little bit. All right. While we're waiting for Chris to join, he seems to be getting ready. While we're waiting for him to join, why not introduce yourself? And we'll go from left to right. So, Koen, who are you? Where do you work? What do you do? What are your specialties? Let's introduce yourself.
Yes, hi, good afternoon, everybody. So yes, Koen Bossaert. I'm one of the co-founders of Da Vinci Labs. That's a Belgium-based company that now makes part of the Proximus Group in Belgium. So we're an affiliate company of them. We're specialized in digital service excellence. And my role there is that the one of solution lead for our vulnerability management service portfolio. So that includes penetration testing services, attack simulations like denial of service simulations, phishing campaigns, that kind of things. And basically, I've been an InfoSec guy for over 20 years by now. So I guess I'm getting old. That's it for me.
We don't call that old, we call that experienced.
Yeah, that's better phrased. Thanks.
So, next on stage, Bernard Montel. Please introduce yourself.
Thank you. So I'm Bernard Montel. I'm the EMEA Technical Director in Security Strategies at Tenable. I've joined Tenable at the beginning of September, and before that, I was a field CTO for another organization called RSA, and I have a background around identity and access management, SOC, and cryptography, and obviously vulnerability management.
Thanks a lot, Bernard. Next, we have Julian Wegele.
Yes. So yeah, my name is Julian. I'm based in Berlin. I'm a threat intelligence consultant at Recorded Future, where I advise organizations on the latest cyber threats and assist them in strengthening their intelligence and security capabilities. And that usually involves technical threat research, assisting in cybersecurity decisions, as well as improving workflows around patch prioritization, among others. And before that, I was working at as an IT security analyst at Security Research Labs in Berlin, where I also help organizations in optimizing vulnerability management and monitoring. Did some red teaming now and then, and also security research. And before that, I did my master's in computer science in the UK.
Well, interesting profile. Thanks a lot for joining. And last but not least, from New York in the US, at the other side of the ocean, we have Christoph Friends.
I'm Chris Friends. I'm the AVP of IT security for Mount Sinai South Nassau, which is a hospital in the New York City area. I'm probably best known for being one of the first people to do zero trust in healthcare and for my work in medical device security.
All right, awesome. Thanks a lot for joining for you too, Chris. All right, so before we go to the next topic and the first topic, let's have a drink. Always make sure that you have coffee. We'll be talking for over an hour, so if you want to follow, let's kick in the caffeine. All right, so first topic of the day. Bernard, I'm looking at you for this one. If we look at vulnerabilities, I mean, in some cases, we have public CVSS scores that are already there. Sometimes they are not. Sometimes vulnerability are already abused by actors before they are released. I mean, think about the Exchange vulnerabilities from last year, those 0 days. They were already exploited by some Chinese actors, according to Microsoft, before they were released to the public. So we had to act really, really fast. Now, how can we actually prioritize, inside our own environment? I mean, publicly, you can say CVSS score is 9.3, it's important. But in your own environment, how can we prioritize vulnerabilities and how can we manage this?
So, do you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
First, just double check. So yes, I mean, what is sure that CVSS is still quite important, but not enough. Within a company, we have to have a risk-based approach, which means that we have to focus on what is important from a risk perspective. So which means if we have, for example, some risky assets, rather than less risky, important asset. Sorry, I have a sound issue because I'm hearing myself. it's a little bit confusing.
Okay.
But anyway, I'm trying to go back on if you hear me well. Anyway, so what I was saying is that we have to have a risk approach, which means that we have to get the context and the threats and the CVSS together to be able to have an approach which is orchestrated by risk. We have more and more CVEs, and we cannot manage all of them. We have to prioritize, and you know, in a nutshell, what I want to say is really to have a risk approach, combining critical assets, threat that we can, you know, see in the dark web, and in the meantime at the CVSS. So that's what it is represented here, combining the vulnerability data, which is still important, but also if we see, for example, we have some exploited vulnerability, this is the threat intelligence and asset criticality. Combining all of them, we'll have a risk approach.
I disabled my microphone for a bit to disable that echo. I don't know if it came from me. Thank you, Bernard. Anyone else in the panel that wants to add something there?
Yeah, sure. I want to comment on that. Yeah, so these are definitely very good parameters to take into account when you want to prioritize vulnerabilities. So you have to, yeah, what you typically do in risk management is look at the likelihood and the potential impact you can get. What threat intelligence is also adding in there is a sense of urgency. Because with CVSS, you could have 10 vulnerabilities that have a CVSS of 10, a maximum score. But if you see that certain hacker groups are actively exploiting one particular vulnerability, well, then there's a bigger urgency, of course, and that's what threat intelligence is, or threat-informed defense is adding in the mix there. So that's definitely something good to take a look at. Also, what I often recommend to our customers as well is that they don't only look at what's urgent and important, but they also look at assets where nothing appears to be patched, because often you see some systems in the network that keep a risk score that's very high forever, which is a sign of the systems not being maintained well on the network. So yes, it's a good thing to look at urgent items, but at the same time, you also need to keep an eye on is everybody within the environment patching the systems, or do we find some outliers where we see that nothing is happening? And that's an area there that you can work on to see if you can improve. Well, first, if you can find the asset owners, and then if you can improve the process of patching, of course.
Just to build on that too, I think it's also critical that a threat-informed defense approach is taken. I heard that mentioned earlier, but that's a really critical way to approach this. I'm really big on breach and attack simulation, actually trying to simulate attacks and how they work. And it's a really great way to identify deficiencies in defenses. You can actually test, see what controls work, what controls don't work, what needs to be improved upon. If we look at most attacks, it's not just a single vulnerability that leads to a successful attack. It's usually more than one action. Even take the recent Log4j, for instance, that required things like outbound LDAP and other stuff to be working. If you had done threat-informed defense and you had good egress filtering controls around that because you looked at ways command and control and data exfiltration, other stuff could occur, and you blocked that kind of traffic, that vulnerability was mitigated before it even occurred. And I think organizations that continue to test their security more and more take a threat-informed defense approach to harden their architecture, harden their configurations. They leave their systems much less vulnerable to a successful attack, even if an unpatched vulnerability exists. And I think that's more and more the way to go, because more and more 0 days are being exploited. So we need to make sure that even systems that may be missing a patch or may have a 0 day that we don't yet know about are also heavily protected. And I think threat-informed defense approaches and constantly attacking your systems, seeing what stands up to attack, what doesn't, and making improvements that way is the way to go forward.
Yeah.
And yeah, maybe adding to that. So when talking about threat-informed decision making and also threat intelligence, as discussed by Bernard, I would like to add that I personally like to think of that in 3 ways, basically. So first of all, I think it helps us to distinguish between the sheer exploitability of a vulnerability versus the actual exploitation that we see. And I think there we can also leverage information that we get from honeypots, for example, or any other type of visibility that we have into actual exploitation. Secondly, I think it's important to keep an eye on the temporal view of vulnerabilities as well. So, for example, it's important to know whether a vulnerability has been incorporated in a common penetration testing tool, for example, and that might tell you something about the maturity of the adoption of the exploitation of a specific vulnerability, and that might change over time, and then also kind of increase or decrease the risk accordingly. And then as a third component, I would also add, and I think that was also said by Christopher, contextual information, like, for example, how is the vulnerability used? Is it used in combination with other vulnerabilities or hardening issues? Does it rely on specific LOL bins, for example, to be eventually exploited? And so to get a better understanding of the how and not only about the what, if that makes sense.
That does make sense to me. By the way, if there are any questions from the public, please ask. We can answer them during the session. Anything else that you guys want to add here on this question?
So I just want to add another element related to what Koen said, for example, on the sleepy assets. We used to do vulnerability management a long time ago by just scanning one shot. We have a picture, we fix it, and we go away. And then we forget the continuous process of having a regular continuous monitoring. By doing that, not only we will focus on a risk-based approach, but we will also try to identify those sleepy assets, because we don't have to underestimate that sometimes, an attack path, as you just described before, Julian, is important. Sometimes those attackers are using attack paths into sleepy assets instead of you are focusing here, but they are going there. I still have the echo. I need to change that.
Mm-hmm.
Yep, exactly. If I can add another thing, I heard Christopher mentioning breach and attack simulations. We're also quite fond of that. I think what this approach brings into the mix is also moving away a bit from just trying to fix vulnerabilities and not looking at what happens next, because we often hear speaking about attacks as if it was an atomic action that attackers are taking, but it actually, well, it's a whole methodology. You have all the different phases as they're documented also in the MITRE attack framework. Mm-hmm. So if we can help limit the impact by making sure that we stop them in their tracks when they want to exfiltrate data, that's also fine. I mean, it's less proactive, of course, than making sure that they don't enter the door at first, but at least we highly limit the impact that the vulnerabilities can take. So this is a trend from moving away from having a hard shell and a soft core towards a more structural approach where we try to protect ourselves in any stage of the attack. So we're quite fond of that, that as well.
I think, as mentioned, the layered approach is very important. Even if we look at the last presentation, the attack was a chain. It was a series of events that had to occur. It wasn't a single vulnerability. And if you can stop the attack at any one of those steps, you're much better off. So obviously, the more steps you can stop, the better off you are, but you can still stop the attack at any one of those potential steps. And testing that out, having defenses there, that's going to be key, because that's going to stop a single vulnerability from turning into something that's disastrous, because you can stop the attack at other stages, and figuring out what those are critical. And a lot of times it's the very basic stuff. I think one of the problems with a lot of the security industry is we're often very focused on compliance, and compliance and security are two different things. So I think it's important to become less checklist focused and more taking more of an evidence-based approach to security. What I like about breach and attack simulation is it makes security measurable. You're not just checking a box to say this control exists. You're actually checking to say, is this control effective or not? And that's a much better way to actually make a decision, because you can begin to quantify security and make decisions that you can show are measurably improving security, not just the fact that you're checking a box.
Exactly. Yeah, that's helping CISOs in a great way to make sure that they quantify things. And now we, with this type of approach, we can finally prove that our defenses are working and worth their money, because it's about getting budget for all of those security controls as well, of course. Yeah.
Yep, true. Of course, before you can do anything, you need to know yourself. So we always go back to that same thing. Know yourself, scan your environment. Yeah, that's the whole thing. There's one interesting question here that I want to ask you from Thomas V. So the question is how to approach this risk-based vulnerability management with regards to third-party black box solutions. What do you guys think about that?
Yeah, that's always hard to accomplish if you don't know what a certain box is doing, of course. So if you have black boxes in your network, okay, you can try to get some more information on it and get some assurances from the vendors or the parties that are managing those assets to make sure that they are on par and at the same maturity level as you are yourself. But at the same time, you could also consider them as untrusted devices on the network and take a zero trust approach from there also to help protect them. So it's not because they're on the network that they should reach any other asset on the network and so on, have free play. So you can put some limitations on what they could do as well to limit the risk from those devices being compromised, for example. Not sure if anybody else wants to comment as well.
I would agree with that. I'm a really big fan of zero trust approaches. It's something that we have to turn to, I think, increasingly in healthcare, because a lot of the devices like medical devices and other stuff are largely black boxes to us because of FDA or other regulations. You can't always install endpoint security on them, and you can't secure them the way you would a traditional device. So a lot of times we have to treat it kind of as a black box. And network segmentation, things like DNS syncholling, where you can't identify malware directly installed on it with endpoint security, but you can look at the traffic coming to and from it and control that. And controls like that tend to be very effective in those types of situations. But network segmentation is a really big one for me. One of the ways I got into network segmentation years ago, going back to some of the breach and attack simulation stuff, is in 2015, I had actually simulated a ransomware attack in the hospital I worked at the time, where we took the ICAR test string and created a script to basically attempt to copy that to every workstation in the environment to simulate the spread of malware. And we learned a lot from doing an exercise like that. One of the things we learned is that we had a segmented network at the time. It was segmented by department. And segmentation was proven to be very effective to keep it contained to the one department in which the attack was launched. But the problem with segmenting by department, as we learned, is that as a hospital, if we were to lose our entire emergency room or our entire radiology department, it was still going to be disastrous to patient care. And that kind of got us going down the road to zero trust. So network segmentation provides a really great way to deal with issues like that. And I've seen that kind of segmentation really help when incidents happen. Because one thing I've learned over the years is that eventually your perimeter is going to be breached, and it may be breached in all kinds of interesting ways you would never expect. Like one incident I sat through was we actually had an X-ray machine in which the hard drive in the X-ray machine crashed and died. And unbeknownst to us, the vendor that repaired the X-ray machine didn't have the original install disks to restore the software, but they maintained the same X-ray machine at another hospital nearby. So they didn't tell us about it. What they did is they cloned that other hospital's X-ray machine's hard drive and used it to restore ours to operation. They bring it back live. All of a sudden, we have all kinds of alarms going off because it turns out that other hospital's X-ray machine was malware infected, and it was now trying to spread in our network. Because we were heavily segmented, it became a non-issue for us right away. and made for a very interesting call to the other hospital. But it just goes to show you that there's all kinds of ways you're never going to expect that your perimeter is going to be breached. And the more segmented you are internally, whether it's a black box system or not, the better you're going to be able to deal with any kind of threat that breaks out, because it keeps it mitigated and contained from the start.
Yeah.
Yep.
So maybe one more thing. So we were describing zero trust based access management, basically network and monitoring, and then also getting more information from the third party provider, and for example in the form of S-bonds, which we're going to discuss later on. But I think in addition to that, one could also think about monitoring chatter around third party software, for example, in specific forums, for example, just to get a better idea of whether other people are interested in exploiting these software products, and then get a better understanding about the potential risk associated with it as a kind of fourth measure.
Yep, thanks, Julian. And that kind of adds to a previous webinar we had, where we talked about the underground for the people. I'm sure that our moderators will share the link to that previous panel where we talked about the underground. So more on that in that panel. Now let's go to the next topic. We do have a bunch of problems, and I see a bunch of questions here about Log4j. I see a bunch of questions about the software bill of materials. We'll go all into this today. So if we just get into last year, what happened beginning of December, 9th of December, I was teaching for Tokyo at the time, having a good week, right? And suddenly one of my students says like, dude, the world is on fire. Like, what? The world's on fire? What are you talking about? Like, yeah, there's Log4j, somebody throw out an exploit, it's all public, things are happening, everybody is scanning, using that exploit, and so on and so on and so on. Now, what was this Log4j thing? It was apparently just a Java framework, Java framework for logging that is used in a lot of software. Now, there we have the supply chain problem. And maybe, Chris, you can go into this. This supply chain problem, I mean, as a community, are there ways that we can prevent this, that we can prevent the supply chain problem? Are there things that we have learned from Log4j last month?
Sure. I think one of the big things is making a security assessment part of the purchasing process. I think one of the best ways to keep vulnerabilities out of an organization or other kinds of threats out of the organization is to prevent them from even being purchased in the first place. So I think more and more organizations need to develop a security assessment process where prior to purchasing a service or a device or other stuff, it goes through a security review. It should also kind of be done annually at contract renegotiation as well to stay on top of it. But creating a process to actually go through and assess the security of the business partners you're taking on or the equipment of theirs you're taking on is a critical security control. And some of the things for that is like the software bill of materials that you mentioned in the slide. I think that's a really great ask for that. Because one of the things is software bill of materials lets you know a list of all the software components that are inside the device or inside the service. And that's really great for a couple of reasons. One, it helps with the vulnerability management area. Take the Log4j you mentioned, for example. A lot of organizations are relying on vulnerability scans and other stuff to try to identify which devices had this particular vulnerability or this particular library. If you had a software bill of materials for everything on your network, it's much easier to identify that. And a scan may or may not pick it up, but a list of all the software components would concretely tell you where it was. It's also very useful from an incident response perspective, because if you're trying to respond to an incident and worried about all the devices with XYZ software component, XYZ vulnerability potentially being compromised as part of the incident, having that software bill of materials tell you where that vulnerability exists is a really great way to speed up the incident response process as well. So I'm a very big fan of requesting for a software bill of materials, and really think more and more organizations need to make a security requirement part of their purchasing process.
Yeah, so you're saying if we force our vendors to have a software bill of materials, then they will only give it to us. Then they will start building that software, software bill of materials at S-bomb. So yeah, thanks for the insight. Maybe one extra thing from the public. Has recent Log4Shell vulnerability provided any insights to InfoSec community on vulnerability management, specifically for open source software? Does anybody have a view on that?
So this is. Do you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, so I'll try to manage the sound issue. So yeah, this is something we see more and more. Talking about the supply chain problem is, you know, open source libraries are hosted into repositories, and as a supply chain, you know, we can talk about those SolarWinds stuff where that has been really targeted once to have many or spread everywhere. But we see the same trend, you know, in those repositories which are attacked by malicious people to compromise some code there. For example, you change a code and you change just the title of the library by 0 by O, for example, and then suddenly the developers that are not really minded to look after each and single character, obviously, they would download the library which is compromised, and then there is a big kind of a chain of spread of that same vulnerability in a way or another, which is a code-based vulnerability everywhere. So this is something we see more and more right now, which is a kind of a domino effect, if you want, around those libraries which are hosted. And the hoster is not really responsible for that. He could check, but it's not about the hoster. It's really the approach, having you know, a target once and spread everywhere. That's one of the trends that we can see, at least in vulnerability management professionals.
And maybe adding to that as well, so talking about open source and this recent incident, I think this week the Apache Foundation, they just presented or submitted a position paper to the software security meeting at the White House, where they also describe the increasing dependence on open source projects by software companies or software products, and they kind of demand an increased contribution through private companies that rely on open source projects to also contribute, in the sense that they want them to get involved in testing, for example, to pay for audits potentially and things like that, in order to also get involved in the whole process of securing open source software.
Yeah, exactly. Christopher mentioned that security should be evaluated when you procure a product. But even within that developer, I think the same goes. When you want to incorporate an open source component, it should be vetted first before you make a decision whether you want to include it in your code or not. Because often you'll have alternatives. So it's best to check out what's available and what the reputation is in terms of security, and maybe do a code audit on those before it's being included. But that would be more, how you say it, it's more a one-off assessment that you would be doing from within one organization. I think what Julian mentioned here is a better approach, because then there's going to be a community with a budget to do that, and the results are going to be shared with the whole community as well, instead of one organization doing it on their own for their own purposes. So quite a good initiative, I think.
Maybe also a question into the round, and maybe you have opinions on that. But so as far as I'm concerned, in last year, the US government, they forced software vendors that want to work with the federal government to provide them with SBOMs for their products. So they forced it from the top to the bottom, basically. And I'm just wondering, there could be a bottom-up approach, but there could also be a top-down approach through regulations, for example, regarding SBOMs. And I've still not decided personally what I prefer in terms of the solution to the problem, but maybe you have opinions on that. What do you think would be better?
Personally, I would say a combination of both is good, because then you get you get more attention to the problem, and there's often things brewing at the bottom, and solutions are coming up. And on the other hand, if you set out high-level requirements, and that's being translated to a more technical level, and it's made more concrete, then you see there could be differences in the approaches that are being proposed from both perspectives. So yeah, maybe it's because I'm Belgian, but I would say let's meet in the middle and make a compromise and look at all the solutions that are at
Truth
hand.
is in the middle.
We like to make compromises, don't we?
Yeah.
All right. Let me check here. There was an interesting question also about SBOM. Yeah. So if we're talking about SBOM, this is a question from Anastasia. She says, if you're talking about SBOM or HBOM, the hardware alternative, what are the views of the panelists and the participants on the widespread use of SBOM and HBOM in the industry, and whether this information, if used publicly and shared publicly with everyone, especially for open source projects, would have any risks for further exploitation by threat actors? Because you're kind of also giving that information to threat actors. You see Bernardo's already giving that balancing
Yeah,
kind
I
of
mean,
answer.
it's the same question than publishing a CVE publicly or not. Yes, it's always very difficult to balance. I'm a big fan of sharing. The fact that we share obviously is giving, you know, the majority of the people are defenders, not the other way. So the more we have the information, the more we can be ready to be able to take prevention task instead of just remediation task, you know, the completely opposite. So yes, the more we know, the more we have visibility, the better we can proactively articulate programs of, you know, prevention, finding against, you know, because we are about a roundtable around vulnerabilities, you know, the sooner you know that there is some component that could have a vulnerability that you can detect in your system, the better you will be prepared. So yes, in this case, I said balance, but obviously it's better to know as a defender as much as information than and the attackers. Then we balance as well our capacity to have the same I would say the same level. You know, we used to say, and I'm sorry, then I will give the, I'm not talking so long. We used to say that the attackers as always, you know, an ascendant compared to the defenders. We have to admit sometimes that we could have in the same, we have the same, you know, we'd be in the same kind of information, then we have equally armed.
I think it's a bit of similar discussion as having pen testing tools online available for everyone to use. Also, threat actors.
They do.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, I think more transparency is always better. And the fact of the matter is we as defenders need to increasingly share information. What works, what our pain points are, what doesn't work for us. Because the reality is a lot of the threat actors that attack us do share information. They work together, they collaborate, they share information. So on the defensive side, we need to do the same thing. We need to be increasingly transparent with each other as to what works, what doesn't work, how we can defend against things. And one of the ways we can overcome a lot of the cyber threats is by working together and sharing information. And I think more visibility and more transparency into the situation is always a good thing, because the people that are working against us are sharing information. So we need to do the same on our side.
Yep. Yeah. I really liked the way that the community and then CSL was doing their thing and CSCNL was doing their thing during Log4j, where they really put out a list for the community to add and to edit and say, hey, these products are impacted by the Log4j vulnerability and they are patched, or the vendor is working on something or this or that. I mean, everybody was sharing. All right. At the same time, you're also saying to attackers, all this, you know, all this software is actually vulnerable, but it's indeed that balance. And I did like the way that NCSCNL and CISA shared all those big lists. That really helped the community to look inside their environment. Yeah. If we go from, so I saw the top down to bottom up discussion. If we go from bottom up, does anybody have anything to say about SecDevOps? I mean, can't we do any testing all around for every commit that is added in your Git repository and do a test constantly for any, you know, wide open security issues?
Well, it's for sure a trend. Huh? We get more and more questions on that as well from development companies where they are looking for assistance on, well, first off, they do realize, so there is some awareness that they have to take more actions to make sure that their output is secure code. And they often realize that they don't have the right tools or the right expertise at hand. So our job there is to educate them, show them the possibilities, because it's quite a complex area. If you would look at all the tools and so on that are available, it's there's a huge variety of tools and so on, depending on which framework and coding language you're using and so on. So we're trying to help there with showing what's out there, tools that can help. What steps they can take in the process, like, for example, incorporating threat modeling as well, using some tools like TAS tools or SAS tools to scan their code. They all have their advantages and disadvantages, of course. But the one thing I think you're still struggling with when you do DevSecOps is to make sure you get to the right level of depth. I mean, a penetration test will never be replaced by a tool. And that's what it's all about in DevSecOps, right? You want to automate your release. So there are some tools that can help, but they have their limitations. So on top of automating things, I think it's still good to do some form of manual inspection to see if there are any vulnerabilities that the tools are missing. And that's where we kind of need to operationalize penetration testing as well, because the classical approach where you do a kickoff meeting, you do a few days of testing and then spit out a report, that doesn't work in a DevSecOps approach, because you're always lagging behind. You're always behind the curve if you do that. But if you do small tests for specific things that have been changed during a certain sprint, for example, then I think you can get some kind of blended approach.
I think that the DevOps and Agile cycle of development have changed dramatically the speed of having features out there released. And that speed, which was like, I don't know, when I began 20 years ago, even more than that, to put an application in production, it was like, I don't know, 12 months or 18 months. Today it's about a question of weeks or sometimes days, you know. So that speed has created a problem on the security space, because developers never been security practitioners. They are developers. Their goal is to put a feature on production. DevSecOps, which is I develop, I put a little, has the security guys to check it, and then I put that in production. You know that we try to change as well that acronym to SecDevOps, which is security by design. So they change their mind and they work together. It's not a question only on technology. It's a question about, obviously, classically people, process, and technology. But they have to change their mind to be able to check the codes you mentioned, Koen, everywhere, all the time. And the code today is not only the application code. We know that the infrastructure itself is a code. When you put infrastructure in the cloud, you don't put a machine, like a physical machine or virtual machine, you know, anymore. We put a list of code in your Kubernetes, for example, and that's creating your infrastructure. That is very important. We think about security before we put that in production. Otherwise, you know, too late.
Yeah. There's a question actually about that topic where somebody's asking, container technology is quite challenging for vulnerability management teams. What is your approach about this technology?
I have an answer, but I don't want to grab time. But that's exactly what I said. You know, we used to look after vulnerability in containers the same way we were looking after vulnerability in the classical infrastructure. Okay, so there are two layers: what is in, and what is, you know, the container itself, or the containment, and the contain inside, you know, in and out. So again, you know, the infrastructure, the container, the Kubernetes, all those infrastructures today are coded somewhere. If this in the code, I want a machine, I want a firewall, I want a network, and I put that into a file. We need to check this file if there are some open doors or misconfigurations that are then before we put the application or the microservice within the container. So that is the first approach, which is very important. If the doors are open at the infrastructure level, whatever you scan on top of it or inside it, you will still have big holes or big vulnerabilities at that layer. Now, microservices themselves, they can still be misconfigured to let doors open. Not talking about ports only, but doors open. So we have those two approaches that need to be done.
Yeah, exactly. If I may add, we do have in our portfolio solutions that help scan the images of containers. So, and that's like looking at exactly which software packages are within the container and looking up if there are any vulnerabilities associated with it. So it's kind of the same approach as software composition analysis tools that would also look at what is my code base being consisted of, what is included, and then just compare it to a vulnerability of databases. So it's taking that kind of approach to see if there are any libraries or software packages that have known vulnerabilities. And then when you see that the image is okay, yeah, you can spin up as many instances as you want. You know that they will all have the same secure profile, of course. So there are some technologies for that. But that's another example of technology evolving and security technologies having to evolve as well to make sure that you can cope with all those changes.
Yep. But at least you already know that you have those things.
Exactly.
There's another question on this, on containers. Being able to deploy faster or more easily can also be a benefit, allowing to patch faster. Any thoughts on that?
That's true. If you have live instances and you update the image and you can do a rollover to new instances that are based on an image that has some vulnerabilities patched, then you can easily update the environment.
The stuff I was mentioning is called infrastructure as code. The infrastructure as code is exactly that. You put a code, which is a configuration file, you deploy super fast. If you check a vulnerability within the code, you patch super fast because you patched before. And then you can check on the runtime and you can check before, so on the code, on the configuration, and then you can try to detect the drift. That's the new way to be able to detect vulnerabilities by, as you said, Koen, following this trend. People are just doing super fast. We have to do super fast security as well. So the better we can is doing infrastructure as code. As you mentioned, some technologies. We also had some technologies at Tenable doing that part, which are really complementary to the image scanning images of the containers. But everything is a kind of a puzzle, specifically around the cloud and containers. We just need to identify, the chain, and going back to DevSecOps, there is clearly a set of elements, putting the infrastructure first, deploying super fast, and then putting the microservices on top of it, make them running. So that complete chain need to be identified, and as soon as we can do that earlier, which is within the code, the better it is from patching, because we don't patch, a container. We do patch the code within the container.
Yeah.
I think it's increasingly important to remember too that for a lot of these things, you can't really bolt security on effectively later. In particular, some of the AppSec stuff, you have to have security built into the application. Is unique controls like input validation, escaping, those have to be part of your design, part of the plan for the application. You can't stick a firewall or something in front of it and expect it to protect it, because that application has to communicate or it's not going to function. So a lot of these things require security actually built into the design, whether it's on the application side, as I mentioned, or on the container side, or even for physical infrastructure. Is it properly segmented? Are you applying least privilege? There's a lot of basic security principles that are not always easy to do, but that's where a lot of the security comes from, and that has to be designed into whatever you're building.
Exactly, and that's the most proactive approach also. to make sure that there's no holes to begin with, so you don't need to patch. Yeah.
Yeah, so we're back to zero trust in that case, of course, making sure that you don't trust anything. Now, there's another question. If we're, I mean, we keep on going. It's very important. All the cloud stuff and the Kubernetes stuff. When only scanning images, wouldn't you be missing configuration issues like running rootless, not running with sysadmin capabilities, and so on and so on? Those are not in the images, but are part of how you deploy it. What are your thoughts on that one?
Yeah, misconfiguration, configuration check before, and that's exactly what I said regarding configuration or runtime. Yep. Those are the two spaces, and we need to be able to obviously look after the misconfiguration also, and not only the runtime.
Yep. So it includes with infrastructure as a service.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think there's also a link there with the solutions that check the security posture of your cloud environments as well. Those could help there as well to make sure that you don't have misconfigurations on the infrastructure level in cloud or private cloud environments and so on as well. So also there you have some solutions to help you out and automate things and monitor things more proactively.
Yep. Great, thank you. Okay, so on the next topic, maybe one for Koen. I know that you have some experience in this. Sometimes organizations only think about the high CVSS scores, things that we already talked about. But what if someone uses multiple low CVSS score vulnerabilities in a row to achieve their end goal, to achieve their objective? Sometimes we call this daisy chaining problems. What are your thoughts on this? What can we do against daisy chaining problems? And is there anything that the community can help with?
Yeah, okay. So, yeah, first off, yeah, indeed, you see cases where multiple low severity issues can be combined and still create a large amount of impact. That does happen, and the bad news is that it's quite hard, I would say, to get those inventorized. Yeah, because if you do, for example, infrastructure vulnerability scanning, you can get a whole report with all the vulnerabilities in there, but that won't really tell you which ones can be combined, because that would imply that for every vulnerability, if conditions for exploitation are met, and if the impact of one vulnerability is sufficient to enable another vulnerability to be exploited. So that's quite hard to inventorize. We do see some examples. Some are published, real cases that get published, or you can make some educated guesses, but there's not really a tool that can help you to just inventorize all this. The problem with that is that it's getting more, let's see, yeah, it's not showing really which daisy chains would be possible. The good news, on the other hand, is that if you can interrupt the chain by just patching one of the vulnerabilities, then yeah, the whole chain would break down. Of course, you can't know upfront which ones are part of a chain. So the only good solution there is to do thorough vulnerability management and not be too happy too fast when you just fixed all the CVSS score 9 and higher vulnerabilities. So you would still need to look beyond that to make sure that you do as much proactive patching and reconfiguration as possible. But even then, you won't be able to get all those chains incapable of being used. So you could still work on limiting the impact, and I think we discussed that already by looking at breach and attack simulation tools and approaches to make sure that if something happens, then at least you can make sure that the impact is limited and you can stop attackers at their tracks before they meet their end goal.
Yeah, so we're actually moving back, or we're thinking back again at threat-informed vulnerability management. Really knowing, okay, somebody used that kind of daisy chain to infect someone or to get into a system. We need to patch these specifically. So yeah, we're going back to that one.
Yeah,
I think it gets
two things. Yeah,
I think it gets tricky when you're talking about chaining stuff too, because not everything that leaves you vulnerable even has a CVE score. Is if you look at stuff like PowerShell 2, it's on by default on all Windows 10 devices. There's no real CVE score associated with it, so there's no critical or high, but it's a risk and it's there, and you can often greatly benefit security-wise by disabling that. But it's not something that would appear really in any vulnerability report as being vulnerable, but still something that if you can, that you should disable because it gets rid of a whole class of attacks.
Yeah. Personally, I think that that frameworks like MITRE ATT&CK, for example, they can play a role here, I guess, because they might help organizations to map vulnerabilities, but not only, but also hardening issues, PowerShell usage, and stuff like that, as you mentioned, Christopher, on possible attack vectors, and that would then give us an opportunity to better understand which vulnerabilities, hardening issues, LOL-bins, and so on are used, how are they used, like in what kind of combinations, and also how often do these combinations occur at the end. But I like the idea of Kuhn actually, that for that to happen and for that to be effective, I think we need to have a proper inventory of these chains. So we need to have a good collection of data, in other words, which requires, in other words, a widespread adoption of T codes. So when people do research or when things are published, T codes would need to be used in order to make this data usable at the end. It also needs to have a consistent usage of these T codes. So sometimes it might matter whether a specific sub-technique, for example, was used and not another one, for example. And then also, I think it also needs to have a very comprehensive view on the techniques, because in certain situations where a CVE, for example, requires local access, there might be hundreds of different ways how to get local access, and you need to kind of view the picture of the whole situation and not only one specific chain, because otherwise it would be very easy to just switch over to another chain, basically. That makes sense.
Yep, exactly.
Yep, does make sense. One question that will be interesting for a couple of you, I guess. Every organization is looking for security specialists. I mean, we are too. We're all looking for security specialists. They are very scarce. It's a very scarce resource to find experts on this. What are your views on partially or fully outsourcing vulnerability management, or a SOC or a SIEM, but let's stick to vulnerability management here?
Okay, that's right up my alley, I would say, because that's what we're offering. We are indeed offering managed services, and the whole business case behind it is to make security more scalable. Because in the past we had a more project-based approach, so we helped customers implement solutions at their site and do penetration tests and so on. But it was implemented at the customer, and they had to cope with the results afterwards. And we often saw that that's where they were lacking resources. And often you still have the perception that it's just about looking at the dashboard and doing something now and then. But the longer our customers were working with vulnerability management tools, they started to realize that there's really a process that has to be created with multiple stakeholders internally, and you do need a vulnerability analyst to make sure that you can provide internal support to explain what certain vulnerabilities are about and which mitigation strategies would be interesting or not interesting. So if we automate the deployments and the management of those systems, I think that's where our value is, because we make the operational part of maintaining these systems easier for them. We can do that at a larger scale because we're serving multiple customers. which means that they have more resources to actually cope with the results afterwards. And even there, we also have services to support them by, for example, helping them with designing a strategy to prioritize the vulnerabilities, to make sure that they're not lost in a flood of information.
So to complement on this one, yes, definitely Tenable as a security vendor, we see that as a trend, which is important, and we support that for sure, because we think that having that scale capacity is very important. In the meantime, the governance, the risk, the business aspect of managing those KPI and KRI, I think the customer need to keep that in a way or another, because he will be the only one being able to take decisions about what is important and less important, and working together with the managed services plus the vendor expertise and technology, and having part which is still from a governance perspective at the customer side. I think it could be a very good balance working the three of us.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. So more of a kind of a hybrid way of doing vulnerability management, partially outsourcing, partially having somebody internally that knows your environment.
Yeah.
Things like that. Yep.
But definitely MSSP is a trend, and we see a benefit on that.
Yep. MSSPs are indeed a trend, but the trend of targeting MSSPs has the same kind of trend. All right. Yeah, again, that balance. Let me check. There is another question specifically for Christophe, actually. Has the US FDA efforts on pre- and post-market security in medical devices borne fruit?
I'd say yes and no. I think it's good that it's heading things in the right direction, because devices are getting more secure over time. So I do think that's a good thing. The big challenge with a lot of that stuff is it's guidance right now from the FDA. It's not mandatory, so not every manufacturer follows it, but it is pushing the industry in the right direction. The big problem for a lot of healthcare industries, though, is the FDA guidance kind of solves tomorrow's problem. It helps make the devices that I'm going to buy more secure. It doesn't deal with the issue most hospitals have of having a ton of legacy devices already in their environment. And that's where the FDA guidance doesn't help, because the reality is medical devices are very expensive. They tend to have long lifespans because their clinical function may work for years after the operating system goes out of support. And nobody wants to spend $1 million to go buy a new MRI machine simply because it's running Windows XP. So I think that's the issue a lot of hospitals deal with. This is actually an issue very near and dear to my heart, because I'm the one who wrote the OWASP and Cloud Security Alliance Secure Medical Device Deployment Standard, as well as the recently re-released Cloud Security Alliance Medical Incident Response Playbook. So medical device security is something I'm very big on. There's a lot of controls that you can put in place around the legacy devices, though. Some of the controls I'm a real fan of is network segmentation, as already mentioned. I'm a big fan of DNS sinkholing, because you can't typically install endpoint security on a medical device. That's a great way to identify a compromised medical device. I'm also big on sometimes putting IPS functionality in front of a medical device subnet that provides you a layer of virtual patching for devices that you may not be able to patch directly. So there are a lot of controls you can think about to put around a lot of the legacy devices. And the OWASP guidance goes into a lot more. The big thing I think really needs to change with healthcare and security is how we look at risk in terms of healthcare. Healthcare tends to traditionally look at risk as any other part of the security industry. We consider things like vulnerability, the environment the system is in, the kind of data on the system. What I think is really missing from the healthcare talk today and needs to be increasingly done is considering the patient safety aspects of the various medical device we have in our equipment. Certain systems within the hospital, if they go down, are going to impact patient care much more than others. Sometimes even the same piece of equipment in different locations in the hospital can have very different impacts on patient care. Take something like a CAT scan machine. If a CT machine is in an emergency room and that goes down, the ED is going to have a huge impact, because they may have to divert patients and other stuff to other emergency rooms, because now they can't triage stroke patients and other potential conditions. That same CT machine in an offsite clinic that just does outpatient procedures, if that goes down, it's probably not a big deal. You reschedule a few patients and it's not the end of the world. So healthcare really needs to get a handle on what systems are most critical for patient care. how patient care is going to be impacted if a virus system goes down. Even on the incident response side, you need to consider, for example, a regular incident response might be able to unplug a PC. It's a common part of the incident response process. Unplug it, yank it off the network to keep the thing from spreading. You can't do that for a respirator. So you really need to begin to catalog and triage the patient safety risks for a lot of these things. And that's where I think a lot of hospitals need to catch up on in terms of medical device security and the security of clinical systems, is they really need to begin to factor the patient safety risks into the equation, both on the security side in terms of I should protect device A more than device B because it's more critical for patient care, and on the incident response side because whether I can disconnect the device from the network and or the patient is going to dictate how I can respond to a particular incident.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I totally agree, Chris. We're going back to what is the impact on your crown jewels in hospitals? That is, what are the most important scanners or other medical devices? In manufacturing industry, you might be talking about some machines or some SAP system or whatever that is more important to you. So yeah. Any other thoughts from the panel here? No, not immediately. All right, so let's go to the next topic, which is the outlook for 2022. I mean, what can we expect in 2022 regarding vulnerabilities? We've seen a lot of 0 days. We've seen a lot of highly critical vulnerabilities, and the things already started with with Microsoft's Patch Tuesday release from yesterday with the one wormable HTTP vulnerability. If you've seen it. So where are we at? What will we see in the future?
So I can jump into it.
Yeah, of course.
We definitely see the fact that the remote workers, you just mentioned that in a slide, but something that began obviously with the pandemic, or began before, but mainly with the pandemic, is here to stay. The network that the majority of the people are using today is not a corporate network anymore, is a home network. And home network has never been secured. So this is one of the first clear trend, or see that we will continue that in 2022 for sure, not a decrease, at least stable or even increase, threat around that. The second part is for me I don't know if someone want to comment on this one first.
Nope.
No. Second trend that we see at Tenable is the attacks against critical infrastructures. Christopher, you mentioned the healthcare. I think it's probably the top one, target right now, if we consider critical infrastructures today. But we see a lot of increase on critical infrastructures, and not only from nation state, but also cyber criminality, ransomwares, everything around, monetization of data. And obviously in critical infrastructure, data is very sensitive. And the third one is obviously the cloud adoption.
Yeah, I think that's the same as far as I can see. If new technologies are getting adopted or new approaches, we will see that those are getting targeted. And indeed, we see indeed a trend where also SCADA ICS devices are more being looked at and so on. But other than that, I would say it's more of the same, right? With in a cat and mouse play since 25 years or something. So we just need to do what needs to be done, and we follow the trends and make sure we cope with those.
Yeah. Yeah, so maybe something that I would be curious about. I'm not sure how it's going to develop, but I think the increasing adoption of Rust, for example, I know that's a very specific topic, but as a completely memory safe language, it has the potential to eliminate certain problem classes like buffer overflow and so on and so forth. And so I see that there are more software projects adopting this new language, and So I would be curious to see the security impact of this rather fundamental change, or if it has any at the end of the day. And also, obviously, it's not going to happen in the next couple of months, but maybe in the longer term. And then also, I touched on this question around open source. I mean, we all know these open source incidents, Log4Shell, Heartbleed, NPM, confusion attacks, and so on. And they again and again show how much we depend on open source. So I would be curious to see how our perception of open source changes. And so maybe with actions like the Apache Foundation and with other foundations or other projects as well coming into the play, that might change and put more pressure on organizations that make use of open source software to also contribute to it in some way or another. And then I think the third thing that I'm also very interested in is particularly when we talk about ransomware, we often see the ransomware attacks, but we forget about looking at the actual the ecosystem of cybercrime, which consists of a lot of specializations. And I think we had 2 years of a lot of ransomware attacks and all other kinds of attacks. And I think now we're starting looking more into the details of the whole, of how this ecosystem works, how initial access brokers make sure that other organizations get access to their networks. And I think with this more nuanced understanding of the whole ecosystem, I think we will also learn things and take that to improve our security posture, our organizations.
Thanks, Julian. Anyone wants to add anything on that?
Yeah, I just want to add one stuff related to ransomware in Microsoft. You just mentioned, and again, nothing against Microsoft, but Active Directory is still a place where we've done a little research at Tenable. So 100% of the ransomware are in a way or another linked to Active Directory targets. Mm-hmm. They are intensively targeting Active Directory for having escalation of privileges. Some of them, if they test, they cannot access to a domain, they just shut down their process. So yes, Active Directory is still a place where clearly the attacks or the ransomware attacks, but not only ransomware, but mainly are targeting Active Directory.
Yeah. The question would probably be, what's the alternative to Active Directory? But I mean, that's we will see how that develops.
AD is not a bad technology. AD is just never been created for being secured at the beginning. And then the problem is not AD itself. The problem is the layers of configuration, because AD has been launched in 2000 or 1999 exactly, but it's been 20 years that people are using that place for binding accounts, granting authorizations, and some application, they don't think about that. They just, hey, I need a admin account or service account. Put it there using this group, that's it, it's working. So not blaming ID is more about the fact that that place is there, has been here for 20 years, or even less sometimes, but those misconfiguration has been put it in layers, and attackers knows it, so we have also.
I mean, it is so important for organizations, the Active Directory, it controls almost everything, and attackers know this. So they will go after the Active Directory. I think it's kind of normal. If you have any other replacement for Active Directory in your system that controls any authentication, authorization on any application at all, especially with single sign-on stuff these days, people will target it. I mean, it's one of your crown jewels.
Everyone is using domain authentication in a way or another, even through a web app. Now, prevention is better than detection in this case. If you detected ransomware at that stage, it's too late. But try to find out if there are doors open using Active Directory and closing it. It's not so simple, but tool and people.
Yeah.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah, doing threat hunts can help a lot. If you do threat hunts for specific things that you read in papers, that you read in reports, and you want to check if you're vulnerable to that, or if that's kind of attack chain is possible within your environment, doing it yourself or trying it yourself can really help you understand your environment and improve the defenses there. So I think threat hunting can be a big part on that. Let's see if we have any other questions here. So we have one more question from Peter van Hoetem. He's asking, SBOM is, from my experience, nearly impossible. How would you solve the problem of transitive dependencies, as in dependencies of dependencies of dependencies of dependencies? He checked a few of his own open source projects, and the transitive dependencies are enormous, are huge. What do you do against that?
Well, like always, we do our best. I mean, SBOM does have its limitations, but yeah, when you would look at a large company and you ask them an asset inventory, you will often see that even a simple asset inventory isn't complete yet. But still, they all do their best to maintain one. Same for CMDB, that's supposed to have more details on what the system exactly looks like and what's installed on the system and so on. Those databases, after so many years, are never complete in a large organization. So the question is rather, does that have do we need to stop using SBOM or looking at that as a solution? Because it's never going to be 100% correct. I don't think so. So let's just use it for what it's worth. And indeed, that's a problem. I don't have a good answer on the problem itself in the question.
No,
I think we shouldn't let perfect be the enemy of good. Just because it's not a perfect solution doesn't mean it doesn't improve things. I think anything that improves visibility is a good thing.
Exactly.
I think any organization's asset inventory, as mentioned, is probably not perfect. No organization has a perfect list of all the software components installed in the organization, but the more complete the picture, the better off you are. So just because it's not a perfect solution doesn't mean it's not an improvement and not something that we should take into account.
Yep.
do continuous asset discovery. I know it's not the best neither, but at least it will be better than relying on static list of assets that has been, as you said, CMDB for 12 months. No more.
Yeah, thank you. Well, we'll round off the panel here. I have one last question for you for the end, but let's go over some quick things I want to give to the public. So there are some key exploited vulnerabilities that we saw in Q4 of 2021, and one extra in the beginning of this year, actually 2 days ago, where Microsoft released the last Patch Tuesday. There are 9 critical vulnerabilities in here. Please look at them. There is one wormable vulnerability, so make sure that you patch these. And then if we go to Siemens, there is this Siemens Nucleus 13 vulnerabilities, which can lead to remote code executions, among other things. We have the forced entry exploit at Apple that was exploited by NSO Group, or at least a tool developed by NSO Group. Of course, we have Log4Shell, a big thing in Q4, and Proxy Shell was still being abused a lot by ransomware actors. So if you still have an Exchange server that is vulnerable, please patch it. And also apply the latest remote code execution patches that were released 2 days ago. All right. Nolan, just for you to know, if you are working on a plan or an incident response plan, don't forget about crisis communication. It can really help you in a crisis. The next Qctr event for Q1 2022 is on the 14th of April 2022. Please follow us on Twitter and on LinkedIn, and you will see the invites there. If you've registered here, you will also receive an invite by email. I saw that there are no real other, not a lot of other questions, some things that we can answer offline. So one last question here before we stop the panel for our panel members. do you have any last tips or tricks or lessons, life lessons, that you want to give to the public as an expert?
Tricky one. The last one.
I would say always test security. Don't assume it works.
Wait,
Think out of the box. Have a risk-based approach on what you do, and zero trust as a mindset and not as a technology.
All right, then you have Chris.
I would say always test security. Don't just assume it works.
Yeah, test your backups too. That's important. Julian, you had something?
Yeah, I was actually just going to say I probably don't have that much experience at the end of the day, but what I've done so far is I just followed my passion or my interests, and yeah, it's more like a personal advice, not necessarily related to risk-based vulnerability management. But yeah, that would be it basically.
Follow your passion. Awesome. And Koen?
Yeah, I would say in general, never stop fighting. It will always be a fight, making sure we're on top of things. We do have, as an industry, some problems with the availability of resources indeed. We're still looking for people. But one advice is also to keep looking at how to making better use of the resources that we do have. So that is looking at making things more scalable and making sure that security personnel is, for example, offloaded with sidetracks and tasks that could be done by other people. So looking at scalability is also, one tip I would like to provide to help solve that problem.
Okay. Well, thanks a lot for joining. Thanks a lot for discussing in this panel. I hope everybody in the public also enjoyed this. So thanks again, and a big round of applause for Koen, Bernard, Christoph, and Julian. Thanks a lot, guys.
Thanks for having invited me. Talk to you later.
Talk to you later.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Okay, thank you everybody. Thank you, Kevin, for moderating this very interesting talk. I see quite some positive feedback in the chat room from the audience, so that's always a pleasure to see that people have respected the efforts, and I hope that they have learned a lot of it. I can imagine that it was also for some people, let's say, not always an easy talk. There was a lot of activity from the experts. So it's almost 1 hour and 20 minutes that we have been talking here about vulnerabilities. If they don't know what vulnerability management means until now, then they will probably never know. So I think that everybody has deserved a good break. You're back on schedule. So that means that we're going to have our break now for 10 minutes, and we will be back at 4 o'clock exactly. See you then after the break. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Exactly 4 o'clock here in Belgium, and we are ready for the third part of this CCB's Qctr. Next on the agenda, unfolding the Log4Shell. And therefore, we have two guest speakers, the master ninja among cybersecurity researchers, Mr. Kosten Raju, and the intelligence lead, Marcus Nees from Swisscom. Gentlemen, may I ask you to join me on stage, please?
Hi, everyone.
Hi, Marcus. Welcome.
Hey, thank you very much for having me.
And let's wait for our ninja, Mr. Kosten. There he is. Kosten, can you turn on your camera? Yes.
Yeah, working on it.
Kosten, welcome again to our quarterly event. You brought Marcus with you. Thanks for that, and thanks for willing to bring the results of your research that you have been conducting the last few weeks. What exactly can we expect from your talk?
Well, we want to share some observations from our extensive network of honeypots. We're running this together, Kaspersky and Swisscom, and Marcus has been analyzing Log4j attacks as well. So we want to share our findings, new discoveries, interesting observations, things that people will find useful. And also, I think at the end, we want to talk a bit about what worked, what went wrong, and what to do the next time.
Okay, and I'm curious about one question, because when I saw the Log4j vulnerability popping up a few weeks ago, was just before the Christmas period, and I thought by myself, there goes my end of the year holiday, because I was expecting quite some incidents related to this vulnerability. But until now, let's say we didn't have that tsunami of incidents that were related to this vulnerability. And I'm wondering if you will be able to give us an answer to that question, and certainly to the question, what can we expect in the coming weeks and months? Gentlemen, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. We will try our best. Can you see our screens? Or at least mine.
Yeah, I can see it well, Marcus.
Excellent. So let's get into it.
All right. Just a few words about ourselves. I'm Kosten Raju. You may know me as Kraju from Twitter. I'm working in the global research and analysis team, also known as GREAT, at the Kaspersky Lab. And I've been in the industry for 25 years, probably more if you include my tinkering with TV sets back in the days and other electronic equipment. Lately, I've been playing a lot with Yara rules to hunt for threats, and worked on pretty much all of our big investigations and announcements. So these are pretty much my focus domains at the moment. APTs, writing Yara rules, threat hunting, and back to you, Marcus.
Thank you. Yeah, like Kosten, I'm also on Twitter. I go by the very inventive handle Marcus Neis. I'm the threat intelligence lead for Swisscom, and my primary focus is on targeted attacks. And I have been in network defense and intelligence for over a decade. Come from a signals intelligence background. And I have the pleasure to work regularly with Kosten. We are partners and friends, and have worked on various incidents, like, for instance, the Qctr marketplace that perhaps some of you guys remember, and now recently Log4Shell. So with that, let's dive right into the actual presentation. We are quite sure that many of you are already familiar with the vulnerability that has kept us so busy. in the last few months, but let's briefly summarize what the Log4Shell vulnerability actually is. So Log4Shell, the CVE was created on the 26th of November in 2021. It was initially discovered that Log4j2, less than version 2.15, had a remote code execution vulnerability and an environment variable leaking vulnerability. And later on, it was found that version 2.15 is still vulnerable to the same vulnerability, to a remote code execution vulnerability. And now organizations are actually urged to patch to version 2.17.1. That vulnerability is very easy to exploit, and it uses an attacker-controlled JNDI endpoint, for instance, an LDAP endpoint, to serve malicious payloads. The attack vector for JNDI has already actually been presented at Black Hat 2016, and Cloudflare observed earliest evidence of exploitation in 2021 on the 1st of December. Unfortunately, we were not able to identify any logs or any information around that, just the report by Cloudflare. Log4j1 is actually not affected by that vulnerability, but it does have a different RCE, and that is much harder to actually exploit. So now that we are actually all on the same page, what about that Log4Shell vulnerability is going on, what the vulnerability actually is? Let's talk about why this guy is actually so bad. Well, first of all, we have already had the discussion around CVSS, and this vulnerability has CVSS rating 10, so that's the highest vulnerability rating out there. Log4j is the most popular Java logging framework. It is literally used everywhere where Java is in use, and the jar file can actually be everywhere. So that includes servers, clients, appliances, mobile devices, and so on. The really bad thing about that is it has not been identified where that library or where Log4j is actually used and who is actually affected. We are still waiting for kind of like a very conclusive list around that. And if that was not bad enough, Log4Shell enjoys something that we call like a hybrid attack surface. The attack can be abused for gaining a direct access or also an indirect access if there's, for instance, a log shipping occurring from a system which is not directly vulnerable, but a system where the logs get shipped to is vulnerable. The same vulnerability can be used for establishing persistence and privilege escalation, and what has been observed recently, it has been used for conducting lateral movement. The guys from Advanced Intelligence were able to identify a Conti ransomware affiliate using Log4Shell to compromise a VMware vCenter server. Okay, so we have discussed how bad this guy is and understood how bad it actually is. And very simplified, we want to explain how the attack actually works. So here the attacker sends an crafted JNDI payload, and at this point, the vulnerable Log4j of the victim happily interprets that payload. And at this stage, there is already part of exfiltration possible. So by using an external lookup, there's kind of like the possibility of looking up environment variables. We will talk about that later on as well. On the other hand, in the next phase, the payload does an external lookup to an attacker-controlled JNDI endpoint, like for instance an LDAP server, which in turn then waits for that request, does a redirect to a HTTP endpoint, and serves a Java class. Once the Java class is then on the system, the Java class conducts further actions and drops, for instance, additional payloads from the system. Carsten, you want to go on?
Yes, so like I was saying, we run an extensive honeypot network, which uses a combination of software. Actually, some of it is developed in-house, others are open source, and Swisscom is one of our partners in this. At the end of the presentation, by the way, we're looking for more partners to run honeypots with us, so it kind of helps everybody if we have more sensors and if we collect more telemetry from all around the world. So what we see here is just specific log-fold shell exploitation attempts in our honeypots. The first ones that we saw were in December on the 10th. That's pretty much when it started from our point of view, and there was a kind of significant spike, if you want, on 17. What's also maybe interesting here to note, you see that maybe the trend is kind of downwards. People finished scanning the internet already like a dozen times over and over, but still there's an interesting peak on 10th of January, which is essentially Monday. So maybe you know, exactly 1 month away, another peak or spike in the amount of log4shell exploitation attempts. We will also be looking a bit at kind of the distribution of this. So maybe next slide, please, Marcus. So the top amount of pokes that we have seen in our honeypots, they're coming from the United States IP addresses, followed by China, Germany, Netherlands, United Kingdom, South Korea, and Russia. So in total, we have, I think, probes from close to 100 countries. Again, the vast majority, if you look at here, more than half of them, they're United States and China. Obviously, what does it mean is just infrastructure used by cyber criminals, but as you will see, not just cyber criminals, but we have seen also APT actors and a lot of kind of security companies using VPSs and services, hosting centers to try to find vulnerable systems around the world. Next slide.
So we looked at the actually collected data from various points and assembled several statistics to look at today. And what we will also do later on, look into those data sets in more details, but from the statistics, we can actually already see quite some interesting things hitting the infrastructure. So where there were about 104,490 environment exfiltration attempts, so environment variable exfiltration attempts it is, and almost 49,000 Java class payloads that were attempted to drop on the systems, and those were all originating either or were all originating from 3,440 scanning IPs. Those were changing on a regular basis. So they were not all active at the same time, but they were switching. And there were 85 callback domains that they were using to do those environment variable exfiltration attempts. And those typically looked like that. So you kind of have like request that is sent and that always contains an environment variable, and that actually happens because there are several lookup substitutions that will reveal sensitive information from the victim machine by looking up those environment variables. So that can actually range from a host name that gets looked up, or the Java version, which is usually the very first thing from a discovery perspective. So they will look up the Java version and identify what additional or what payload they can drop onto that system so that it will run. Apart from that, there are more sensitive details that can be obtained, like for instance, AWS secret keys, Obviously, this is kind of like limited to what is stored in environment variables. But yeah, there's a list from a guy on Twitter, the Sermon, not sure if I pronounced it correctly, and he has assembled a list of interesting information that can be extracted. We will share those details later on as well, so that you can actually have a look at that too. From the perspective of what has been used to exfiltrate those domains, we were primarily identifying callback domains that were used for conducting those exfiltrations. And Carsten and myself, we maintain a list to track those domains that we will also share later on. And we really recommend to put those domains on an DNS RPZ or redirect those internally and monitor them for hits that will give you an insight if there are actually systems vulnerable, and by the same token will not reveal to the attacker that you are actually affected by the vulnerability. Okay, let's have a look at the payloads that we observed. So as we will look into more details here too, we will briefly actually just go over the specific payloads and their prevalence. So of course, the most prevalent payloads that were observed were from botnets and miners getting dropped. That is typically the first thing that happens when a vulnerability like this comes out. Then we saw quite a bit of reverse shells getting dropped, and closely followed by rats. And later on, there were the additional payloads with less prevalence, like ransomware info stealers and access broker profiles. What's really important here about the observations that we made is that the Java classes that got dropped really always, or almost always to 98%, were using living off the land techniques to load additional payloads. So for instance, like using wget to download an additional backdoor or whatsoever onto the system. And only 2% observed just relied on what was already baked into the Java class code. Carsten, you want to add more to the obfuscation methods?
Yeah, I guess one of the things which complicates detection, I mean, it complicated detection, at least for us, because as we go through the honeypot logs, we need to precisely extract those that are related to log4shell and just separate them from the others. But also, I guess this is kind of an issue with pretty much any IDS. The fact that there's a myriad of different ways that this exploit can actually be implemented. So if maybe initially we were seeing pretty simple things like $, curly brackets, GNDI, colons, LDAP, and so on, in time people started, to implement snort signatures. Also, Yara rules are pretty effective if you run them on HTTP access logs, for instance, so at least like a reactive detection technique. But then kind of obfuscations appear. So we started seeing more and more scanners and threat actors poking our honeypots implement obfuscation methods. So I guess that the first ones we saw is just to encode part of the URLs using percentage 3a. So that's one example there. And then we started seeing, all these kind of tricks with the syntax, such as lower L and so on and so on. This kind of complicates the regex that you can use to grab the logs, and kind of there's a funny thing that I've seen. Eventually, people added more and more possibilities to the regex. So the kind of final, the ultimate regex of all regexes to find log4shell exploitation attempts. It was almost like a full page long, very big one. We've been also using Yara, like I was saying. Again, you can implement nice regex with Yara. So it can be like tricky sometimes, by the way, as an advice or a tip that we implemented. Sometimes it is easier to grab large amounts of data using regex in Yara. It also kind of simplifies when you have to look for multiple things at the same time, right? So you can automate that and keep adding rules in time to alert you of interesting hits. So keep this in mind. I also know of other people who rely on Yara for this task, as opposed to just running simple grep command line, short lines, on the logs.
So that's definitely a very good thing to do. We actually do or did the same, and this is what we applied also to that payload that was observed. So we are talking here about the Dridex payload that was very shortly after the Log4Shell vulnerability came out distributed. And one of the, I think, less observed things in the payload was, besides the fact that there was actually Dridex getting dropped, there was on Linux systems Python Metaprater payload getting dropped onto systems. And that was actually true for the majority of payloads. So there was at least one payload per operating system, so either Windows or Linux. But in the majority of cases, what we saw, there was always kind of like an execution for both operating systems. And we also catch that because we applied Java rules to the specific payloads. So we were just matching on execution strings, typically like how a command line is getting started on any operating system. And that was actually catching the Metaprater request from curl here. So that was really interesting to see that there was actually a Metaprater getting dropped onto the Linux systems here too. Additional payloads, and here we have the same example from what we just mentioned. There's a Linux and a Windows execution from the same Java class. This is a backdoor access that was dropped on the system using Living on the Land here to add an account once an additional payload got dropped onto the system. And the Windows version would actually also enable the user for remote desktop access, so to simplify the administration of the compromised system, most likely.
So in terms of the malware, this is again specifically the kind of things that were hitting our honeypot. So we were able to download and to manually identify pretty much each payload. We've seen, of course, a lot of miners. So I guess that financial profit, it was a very, very strong motivation. This was also the kind of stuff that was dropped the most in the very early beginning. Kinsync, for instance, it's a kind of very interesting cryptocurrency miner operation. But also what was kind of funny, in my opinion, was maybe fake, if you want, ransomware called Qctr. The reason I'm calling it fake, because it was kind of trying to suggest that to decrypt your data, I need to get in touch with a person in the United States. So somehow I don't believe that was actually the case. Firefly, which is malware used typically by Chinese-speaking APT groups. The ELF Meterpreter loaders, also kind of interesting. And well, smoke loader, which is pretty much it can be a beginning for anything these days. Next slide. Speaking a bit more about Kinsing, it's kind of I guess it's a kind of a nasty thing to get infected with this, because it comes with the user mode rootkit, so it tries to hide itself pretty well. Then not only that, but it's kind of funny that it uninstalls a bunch of other competitor malware and miners. It has like multiple persistence mechanisms, so it has kind of resilience against that. If you try to remove it, it may come back through the other persistence mechanisms. As far as we have been able to say, it focuses on mining Moneros, and it also employs several parallel command and control channels. There's a lot of IOCs in the public domain for Kinsing. We've seen both new IOCs, but as well as older IOCs, which have been known maybe for more than 6 months, still being used in the wild. And malware, including some of these payloads and packages, are actually were updated on a daily basis by the guys behind Kinsing. Next slide. This is a very interesting case. If you manage or have access to large amounts of data, I'm pretty confident that you have seen this. If you have the ability to search your logs, try grepping for these 3 IP addresses that I have here on the screen. All 3 of them actually hosted by Selectel in Russia. In particular, I kind of suspect that this is actually a company called Hostway, which has infrastructure at Selectel and offers cheap VPSs. I sent abuse request to both Selectel and Hostway as like maybe in a matter of hours after I would first see a request associated with this. I didn't get any replies from any of them, and some of these were actually active even after the new year. So I would assume that the abuse requests weren't handled very well. Now, why this is interesting, we believe that this is associated with a pretty active access broker. They are activating on several Russian-speaking language forums. So if they were actually successful in breaching your networks using Log4j from one of these 3 IP addresses, what was probably coming next and what you can be expecting is ransomware, one of several strains of ransomware, so not just one specific team. Again, like I was saying, the access is being sold. Next slide. So one way to track these operations, they are actually implementing all sorts of different exploits. So for instance, in November, we've seen them massively scanning the internet for exchange vulnerabilities from this IP 45155. Again, you can check your network logs for the IP address. What kind of sets them apart? So if you want to spot them, that would be searching for this @evilcorp string, which again is not unique to this access broker. However, when this is actually being delivered with the user agent of Go HTTP client as opposed to Python or curl user agents, this appears to be specific to this threat actor. So you can actually find traces of their activity going back in 2021, so earlier. Next slide. This kind of funny case, very, very noisy, entity called Alpha Strike, which goes by the motto, everybody needs a hacker. And we've seen them poke our honeypots like very, very heavily. Not only that, but in a way also kind of suspicious or funny behavior. They were even trying to log in by SSH into our honeypots using user $ curly bracket $ curly bracket several times. So maybe this is something that you also want to look for. I see that they've updated the website recently, claiming that they are notifying the vulnerable organizations. So I cannot say about that, but it's kind of weird that they were also trying to do SSH logins with such parameters. Next slide.
So we talked a lot about how attackers are actually attacking us, but we also wanted to give you a different perspective on Log4Shell and its exploitation. With every threat, there comes an intent, an opportunity, and a capability that defenders have to deal with. But there's also actually the same at the defender's disposal. So this is in particular true when you've got an exploit that just came out and there's attackers trying to gain a competitive advantage. And that usually ends up that they get sloppy during their operations. This typically leads to OPSEC mistakes, and that is exactly what we could observe with Log4Shell. So we were able to identify about 93 systems where Log4Shell exploit tools were exposed, plus additional payloads. So what you can see here on the right side, that is an actor who exposed all of his tools and all of his payloads. And by the number that you see on the hit side, you can most likely guess that several targets actually were at least served with the Java class. This is another very interesting example that we were able to pull. So here a threat actor left open all of his home directory, and that enabled us to get access to the bash history file. So we could literally see all of his actions and what he did during the operation and during the attack. So in this case, after he dropped several payloads via PowerShell, he dropped 2 additional samples onto the system. And in this case, that was one of the Farfly samples, which belongs to the Ghost family. That is the server.exe, and the server.2exe was a Cobalt Strike sample that got dropped. All right, so we have spoken a lot about the different attacks, and we want to invite you to actually take part in our poll that we have opened, and we are curious what mitigations and what detections you have implemented. And we wanted to give you several of the mitigations and detections that we implemented and that we found useful, also as a possibility to discuss further. So obviously patching was the most effective thing to do, but sometimes that is not possible. So you will have to think about different ways of blocking the attack altogether, of mitigating it. So we found blocking direct outgoing connections very useful, but also identified that that might not always work. So at least blocking LDAP or RMI would prevent most of the additional payloads that were dropped onto the systems. Enforcing proxy connections or enforcing a proxy for all systems going outside was very helpful too. There are discussions that there are JNDIs connections going outside over proxy. We were not able to identify that. Obviously, blocking all outbound DNS, that is a very difficult thing to do. If you can deploy that, that is super useful, super helpful. And then putting all of the DNS callback domains as I already mentioned, on an RPZ or redirecting them internally. Super useful to identify compromised systems or at least vulnerable systems and not tipping off attackers, as already said. Isolating the systems, obviously very, very helpful, but not always possible. And one of the most likely also most efficient things to do is whitelisting binaries for network connections. We understand that this is also not always possible, but has proven to be very effective to do. Unfortunately, what we have identified is that our web application firewalls, or that web application firewalls in general, were not always doing the best jobs. In particular, they were easily bypassed by our bug bounty hunters, who did a fantastic job in identifying vulnerabilities and identifying vulnerable systems, and did really a fantastic job here. All right, before we conclude our presentation and leave you with some additional actions, let's briefly talk about some lessons learned and a possible outlook on what's possibly happening. So yeah, we really identified that technology that we use is actually not always helping us in such a way that we are expecting it to be used, and is most likely or was actually also affected. And vendors did sometimes not even know, only then when we let them know that their product is actually affected. And this vulnerability is really a reminder that we actually should challenge our current threat models because of that. Fortunately, we also saw that many good old basics were really reliable. So network segmentation and traffic restrictions, application whitelisting, all of that was really effective. And yeah, bug bounty hunters, they did a really awesome job. And I want to give them a big thank you on the location now. From a perspective of the actual attack and what Pedro mentioned before, we also saw that this attack was, or we also think that this attack was actually just the beginning, and that attackers just started to integrate the vulnerability to their toolkits. We could actually see that from various agility angles. So for instance, we might guess that top APTs implemented the vulnerability according to what the Cloudflare report gives us in terms of speculation. We saw crypto miner groups, Kinsing, Lemonduck, etc., implementing the vulnerability very fast. We saw that with Proxy Shell, for instance, already, that they are the first ones to implement this. Next ones, access brokers, they are very fast in doing that too. And now ransomware groups and average APTs are following suit. So yeah, we actually think that this is now going to be implemented much, much more into attack toolkits. And with that, we want to leave you with an action plan.
So it's kind of interesting also to look at the poll results, and I see that over 69% actually of the attendees are saying that patching was the most efficient. Of course, having a good patch strategy is key here. What worried me when it came to Log4j was the fact that this software might be included in other packages, so you have to wait for different vendors or other projects to implement the patch. So maybe in some cases you can't patch it directly by yourself. One such example, which was a kind of a bit of a nightmare scenario, was the fact that Elasticsearch actually has the ability to use Log4j, but is disabled by default, which is kind of funny because, well, I would say that there's Elasticsearch in a lot of places. So, of course, we are using Elasticsearch to collect all the logs from our honeypots. So it would have been kind of funny to have the honeypots all infected, if you want, through this vulnerability because of the usage of Elasticsearch. But at the same time, also what you said, Marcus, to me made a lot of sense. The fact that there are some mitigations that you can deploy that will be effective in the future, even for kind of unpatched vulnerabilities or other attack vectors, like, for instance, forcing all the connections through proxy, right? So that one, obviously, a very, very effective measure that might be interesting to consider. A lot of, again, a lot of resources, and I saw that SweetHack is also in the chat here, and I fully agree it was a great community effort to understand the attack surface, and there's a lot of resources. Well, I'm sure that pretty much everybody is familiar with this, so we're just sharing them here just in case. Also, next page, please. If let's say people are still thinking what to do, and if we look at the poll, actually, I see that not everybody has implemented mitigations just yet, but some are still planning to, 3%. Well, in case you're still planning, these are the versions that you want to have to install. And there's also, of course, security vendors have implemented exploit prevention, vulnerability management, patch management. So, for instance, if you use Kaspersky products, they have specific detections for log4shell attacks. But again, this is true for pretty much all the top vendors out there. Next slide. As for further reading, I do like the CERT B page, which has a lot of detail, and the webinar that Kevin did in December. For me, it was excellent. GovCert CH and again NCSC UK. A lot of resources out there, and do feel free to follow us, myself and Marcus, on Twitter. We try to post from time to time about security topics and to share our findings in real time as early as possible. If we have IOCs, we share them on GitHub, and we try to contribute a little as we can to the community. Next slide. And from my side, if you're open to collaborate and you have access to network infrastructure and you'd be interested to join our honeypots initiative, drop us an email to honeypots@kaspersky.com. We're still looking for other partners to work together. What you get is basically you get statistics and you get access to the information which is collected from your own honeypots, and it basically it allows you to have better defenses in your own networks. And Marcus, I think also you wanted to talk a bit about what worked for you guys.
Yeah, so as already mentioned, we had really big success with our bug hunters, and I want to invite people to join our bug bounty program if they're interested. And by the way, we are hiring too.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much, and of course, thanks Marcus for also taking the time to put together all this information to go through their huge network logs. I know that Marcus was actually a lot more busy with defending their networks in December. So now that the things are more quiet, the waters are a bit more calm. We have time to look back and discuss a bit about this significant security event of 2021 and what worked and what did not. And I see Pedro online.
Yes. I'm wondering if there is anybody in the room who is not hiring at the moment. So anyway, gentlemen, a very interesting talk. You can see also the feedback in the chat room is very positive. It's always a pleasure to get positive feedback. Thank you for the compliments, Kostin. I think you have made Kevin and Sandro their day. They will love the comment from the master. I've seen that there are a few questions in the question room, but unfortunately unfortunately, we went a little bit over time. May I invite you, Kosten and Marcus, to answer the questions in the question room after you leave the stage? Just answer it by writing, because I don't have the time anymore to answer them live here on stage. Anyway, once again, thank you very much. Thank you for your time. Thank you for all the information that you have shared. Take care, and hopefully we can meet live in 2022. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Stay safe, everybody.
Okay, and then we are ready for the last talk for today. Last demo, because last time when we had our Qctr, we had Paul Vixie who joined us and gave a live demo, and the feedback that we got from our audience was very positive about that. So we thought it was a good idea to have another live demo during this Qctr. And therefore we have invited Milan Pikula, the Deputy Director of the Slovakian CERT. Welcome, Milan. You're going to give a presentation about the open source tool Taranis, I assume.
Yeah, that's correct. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for having me on this wonderful event. Attackers exposing bash history to their victims, crazy stuff. But I'm going to return to the more generic, ever-present topic of vulnerability management. I will talk about Taranis NG, which is an open source tool that we developed with a very lots of help from the community. So what's the software about? It is for processing open source intelligence in the non-structured format. There are already many tools that allow you to work on structured data, but many times you need to go over news articles, tweets, RSS feeds, email lists, and find some information in there. And we got inspired by the existing tool Taranis 3 from NCSC NL, which we hopefully pushed to a new level. It allows a simple workflow of assess, analyze, and publish. In the assess phase or stage, you download, or the tool downloads the news items from various sources. These are presented in a single inbox, very similar to an email client, where the analyst can read them and find some interesting stuff. The interesting stuff is moved from the assess to analyze stage, where a structured report is being made. And from the analyze, you push the information to publish, where you create nice PDFs, emails, upload to your website, and whatnot. So a bit more detail about assess, analyze, and publish. I will very briefly jump to a live demo. The assess is used to collect news items from various types of sources, such as websites, RSS, Atom, Twitter, Slack. You can add news items manually. You can group them yourself, or there are bots that would group the items for you. The analyze phase is able to automatically enrich the data on demand, and there are multiple types of report items or advisories or whatever that you can create. For instance, you can start with vulnerabilities and make a nice vulnerability report with all the fields such as description, CVSS score, CPE, etc., etc. Or you can start with some information about APT activity and write a report on that. And in the last stage, you use publish, which is able to create HTML, PDF text, or actually even a MISP event, and you can send it out. On top of this, there are two things that we improved on or created from scratch for this iteration of the tool. One is the self-service asset management portal. So as soon as your analysts create the report on some vulnerability, your customers are able to see if the vulnerability affects their systems, because they are able to add their own software using a CPE dictionary, and when there is a match, it will just display the match. And also, previously, this was usually done by every team separately. You were not able to share the efforts of multiple people. So we added sharing. You can connect your instance of Taranis NG to another instances, for instance, to colleagues from the other teams or other organizations, even other countries. And you can share whichever information you need. For instance, there is a possibility to upvote or downvote the news item. And if you just share these likes, then relevant news items will automatically go up for your analysts. You can also share comments, share the news items or analysis, and many other stuff. So let's go to live demonstration. Taranis NG, okay, I will log out. So Taranis NG is a software that you can install on your own machines using Docker. When you log in, you can see these most important parts: assess, analyze, and publish. In the assess, you have groups of the news items, and the news are automatically collected from various sources. For instance, here I can see some article which was collected today about someone who hijacks WordPress sites. You can use keyboard navigation or mouse, and you can use dictionaries to highlight words of interest. If you click on the news item, you see the preview of the news item. You can also, of course, go to the original article and you can see some metadata and stuff. What is more interesting is that you can upvote or downvote the item or push it to the analysis, create the analyze item. So let's go over here. This one is already structured report that you are creating from the unstructured data. When you start, for instance, I will add new. You select the template for the report item. There are some predefined templates, two of them actually, a vulnerability report and MISP report. So for the vulnerability report, you fill in some fields, and I will go into more detail later. You can customize these. You can add your own templates, which are completely in line with how you structure the reports for your constituency. So in the vulnerability report, in this case, I have, for instance, CVSS. It also, of course, includes the CVSS calculator, where you can add required data, and it will automatically calculate the score if it's not provided, for instance, from the source article. You can add TLP, confidentiality, some description, some CVE numbers. Of course, it supports a lookup into the CVE dictionary. So, for instance, if I add log4, I will see all of the log4 shell vulnerabilities which were recently discovered. So you can add these, you can add some impact and whatever. Affected systems. Here you can add the systems affected by the vulnerability, and even using the CPE dictionary, you can search in the existing software and add the CPE tags. Okay, now I will not save this. I will go to the publish phase, where complete products are being made. So you again select a template. What do you want to create? For instance, in our case, in Qctr, we are creating security advisories for the most critical stuff, and we are creating weekly security bulletins for the rest. So I will select a PDF advisory, or again, you can customize these templates as you wish. I will add some report items that will be added into the PDF. I can click on show preview to see the preview of the generated PDF, and I can, of course, send it out. Okay, now let's go to the other part of the portal, the one that you can expose to your constituency, my assets. So this part is for everyone outside of your organization. They can create asset groups. For instance, I created a group named servers. They can add assets such as mail server. And for each asset, they are adding the software that is installed on this asset. Using, again, the CPE dictionary with lookup, you can also import from the CSV. As soon as I look at this page, I can see, okay, everything is fine. There are no vulnerabilities for my machine. Let's make it change a little. In this instance, I configured this to have postfix 259 installed. So let's suppose someone, some of your analysts will find an article regarding this particular version of postfix. They will move this article to the analyze phase or stage, and in the analyze stage, they will add the affected system, postfix 259. I'm not sure. Most probably, yes, it was this one. Of course, they can also add new other CPE codes. They would mark the vulnerability or the report item as finished, complete. And when the client goes to their My Assets page, they immediately see, okay, this asset is somehow affected. They also can configure email alerting or some other means of notification. For the administrators, the architecture is quite complex. I will not go into details, but what is important, you can add your own sources. You can also import sources from the lists that are being created by anyone else. So you first choose the type of the collector, for instance, web collector or RSS collector. And when you select the type of the collector, you fill all the details. From which website do you want to collect the information? Where is, in the web page, where there is the name of the article, where there is content of the article, what's the go to the next page button, etc., etc. And you add this news source and it automatically starts collecting. The same for presenter notes. You can add multiple ways of presentation, publisher notes, etc. There are lots of features, but we are very short on time. So I would just skip to the last slide, where I would like to invite you to look at the software. So the software is published at GitHub on this address. You can also use the short address taranis.ng. We have a Slack channel for support. You are all invited if you wish. You can use this short URL to join. And hopefully we will welcome you in the community of users of Taranis.ng. Thank you very much.
Milan, thank you very much for your contribution to the event, the interesting talk about Taranis. I hope that people have understood that Taranis is certainly worth to take at least a look at it, to do some tests with it, and to implement it in your daily processes. Thank you very much, Milan. Okay, we are almost at the end of this event. Do not forget, for those who haven't heard it yet, CCB is hiring. So if you will take a look at our vacancies, feel free to visit our webpage. We still have one poll open. We just published it, a very important one. We'd like to hear your thoughts about the quality of this event. So please provide us feedback about that one. And then last but not least, and I hope I can share my, oops. Here we go. Then one last thing, the request for presentations. Our next Qctr will be held on Thursday, April the 14th. Now I'm hesitating about the dates, but okay. So the next presentation will be in April. And for the first time, we want to launch a request for presentations. So if you have any interesting topics in mind or any interesting research that you have conducted, please let us know. Send us an email to info@ccb.belgium.be, and then we will see if we can schedule you on the agenda for the next CCB's Qctr. Thank you very much for joining us. I hope you have learned a lot, that you enjoyed it, and that this will contribute again to a more secure cyberspace. Stay safe and hope to see you next time. Bye-bye.